Geez, I'm so tempted to make a Stellar Blade joke in terms of Eve of Ruin being the subtitle for this module here, but I'm going to restrain myself from making that easy joke right now.
I wouldn't get it. I have not played that video game. I'm aware that it's sexy.
The main character, I believe the name is Eve, and, you know, I believe some people would claim that the developers have censored/ruined that character as a result. So that's all I got. It's early today for me. I only woke up half an hour ago, but I'm ready to get rolling here.
Oh yeah, the video game. Okay, I do remember a post that the main character is named Eve, and she runs into a man named Adam later in the story. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not. I just saw someone joking about the writing of that game, which is very funny to me. Yeah, you just woke up. It is 10 a.m. at time of recording. I haven't gone to bed yet. So interesting energy. We're gonna find out.
Yes, we'll see if we can survive this whole thing here. But yes, if my bad attempt at a joke is any indication, it is time for yet another review of official materials. And today we are looking at the most recent multiverse jaunting adventure, Vecna, Eve of Ruin, that just came out like within the past week or so.
I keep wanting to say Eye of Ruin. Maybe it's because Vecna's eye is like a famous item.
I made the same mistake when I first saw this, because I'm just like, okay, Eye of Ruin, of course, it's Vecna. No, it's Eve of Ruin.
I'm not sure that any Eves are plot important in this one. Or maybe I missed it. I could Control F Eve, see if I missed an Eve in there, but it feels pretty eye-centric.
I think Eve of Ruin just has a very big, almost like Avengers-esque, like this, like it comes off, we're talking about like a multiverse threat type of campaign. So I think that's the rationale behind the naming Eve of Ruin, but I'm not going to belabor that too much there. There's quite a bit to go over. What do you want to start on? Just like general introductions to the whole thing, or what?
Yeah, these usually go for 2 or 3 hours because we can never shut up and our brains are full of garbage.
That's true.
But yeah, it's been a little bit since we did one. We did a Planescape one and a Spelljammer kind of review, pseudo review, walkthrough. First thing we should probably say is this is going to be full spoilers. We're going to walk through the plot of I almost said Eye of Ruin. I almost did it. Eve of Ruin. So if you want to play this as a player, I guess maybe wait until after to listen to this. But DMs, you know.
I'm going to add an added point here. If you're interested in playing this, do not even look at the item descriptions, because one thing that drew some ire from some folks, it's that some of the principal items involved in this campaign, the way they're written up in the book and on D&D Beyond, straight up spoil plot points for the campaign. They're not written in a way that allows some certain items to be used independent from the campaign, like, let's say, the Rod of Seven Parts, which we'll talk about later on. If you read that description, it's going to spoil things about the campaign. So be careful about that if you are interested about this campaign in any capacity.
One thing I noticed about this release is I didn't hear much about it before it came out. It seemed to me like there's a lot less hype. Do you get the sense of that? Is there any reason for that? Like, I saw more people tweeting about they redesigned the Gold Dragon for like an upcoming book than I did about this particular release.
I know that part of it is because a bit of the lead up to this release got mired around a few controversies, one of them being the fact that in D&D Beyond currently you can no longer buy portions of a book. Like, for example, if you just care about the new subclasses or feats that a book might have, you could buy just those to add them to your account, and that is no longer the case. You have to buy full products, and that was something that was rolled out basically silently as a change. And I think the other fact is just the fact that this is, not to say that this is an unimportant release, but it might have just been that there might be a bit of fatigue, and I think some folks might have more eyes looking towards like the 2024 PHB, if that's not even out yet. I don't know if it is or if it isn't, or whatever the next plans for D&D Beyond and other properties are. So it's hard to say if it got lost in all that. This is meant to be like a 50th anniversary, big epic scale event, and it becomes clear why that's like the intent as we'll go through the book itself. But before we dive in there, let's do what we've done the past few times and take a look at the disclaimer, which kind of reveals a little hint as to what the theme for this campaign is. The disclaimer: all resistance to the Lord of the Hand and Eye is futile. Any thwarting of his will or his creations is temporary, and the Undying One will eventually remove all evidence of any inferior versions of reality. There will be no mercy for your pitiful souls, which never existed. So,
Unless he's distracted and in a cave for a long time, and you can kind of walk up behind him and bonk him on the head. In which case, forget about all that.
yeah. Well, listen, Vecna forgot to write the reality where he doesn't have hubris, I guess.
Yeah, what's your experience with Vecna as a character? Because I've read a bunch of the old books. He was a main villain in like second edition. There's the classic book Die Vecna Die, which I took a little bit from for season 6. But then he kind of went more into obscurity until I guess Stranger Things. Or no, Critical Role came first. I think he was the final boss of Critical Role season 1, and then he was the villain of like the last season of Stranger Things, and not him specifically, a character named Vecna.
Don't forget his most notable appearance, the upcoming additional Slayer in Dead by Daylight. He's going to be the new killer in that game. I wonder if that's a bit of cross promotion.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's very funny.
Yes.
But He went from like, oh, nerds know about Vecna to like 20 years of no one knows about Vecna to everyone knows about Vecna. He's now like, would you say he's like top tier famous?
He's definitely, I mean, like if you think about the most famous like villains from D&D, I think Vecna, Strahd, maybe Loth, maybe Tiamat, but I think Vecna and Strahd are like the two like most outward facing ones I can think of.
It's interesting you name those specific ones. I wonder if they have anything in common. What about Acererak? You didn't mention Acererak.
Well, Acererak is associated with, the Tomb of Horrors, which I have things to say about when we get there.
Okay.
But as far as I know, but I know that a bit more because what adventure this reminds me of faintly, though not entirely, This was something that was done in 4th edition. They had these things called super adventures, and one of them was based on the Tomb of Horrors. And the super adventure was basically you'd have different adventure modules that created a storyline, but you weren't meant to play them all in a row. You were meant to pepper them throughout a larger campaign. So it's almost like you'd be able to visit in and dip into this as you go along. And there are traces of that sort of concept I see in here, but yes, I did not mention Acererak for reasons.
All right. We will get in then. So this is an adventure for 10th level players who will then go all the way up to level 20 for the end. So that's pretty fun. I think that's relatively unique within the main published books, is something that high level.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not like the case in Planescape where it's like you have a sudden level jump towards the end. In this case here, you are progressing up over time. One small downside I see to it, and this is not like a devastating one, is just the fact that as a result, the structure of the campaign is notably more linear than the Planescape one. And I don't think that's necessarily a negative, but it's one of those things where they're trying to have you hop around with all these sort of like the best of sort of vistas and such. And they have certain plans for how the challenge ratings are for each of those branches. So they're expecting specific character levels for those different stages and such.
Yeah, the Planescape book we reviewed is kind of open world, where there's the Outlands. You could do kind of these quests in any order. This is much more a guided tour of the greatest hits of Dungeons & Dragons for the 50th anniversary. That kind of makes sense as a structure, but you go to them in order, one at a time. Could be restraining, depends on your play group, Right. I think some people really appreciate being told what to do, and some people don't.
Well, and I think for people who are decently long fans or people who have sort of read into enough materials, like there could be a bit of fun where you suggest, hey, we're going to go to Eberron now. Hey, we're going to go to Kryn now. And people be like, ooh, all right, let's see what we get up to in this particular branch of things. And, it can be, there's a certain fun to be had with that. But yeah, geez. uh, the introduction alone has me like thinking, well, I can see how they're setting some big stakes here, but also like there's something in the introduction I was reading over that made me think, this could go off the rails really bad if the party is of a certain mentality, but they do technically have an out for it, kind of, later on in the campaign.
I feel like we're going to come back to this a lot, being playgroup dependent, because like this season of Dice Funk, we had a player ask, "What's an etin?" Which I think if that's your frame of reference, we're going to be completely fucking lost during this whole thing. But if you're like us and you're like, I don't actually think that comports with the way that was described in the Book of Vile Darkness, then maybe it's more of your bullshit. Yeah. So what did you notice right off the bat?
Well, okay, so you get right to big spoilers here. One of the main principal things that makes the party go through this multi-planar thing is that they're told to do so by Mordenkainen. Like Mordenkainen's like, you all need to, we tried to get rid of Vecna. It didn't work. You need to go gather the rod of 7 parts. But it's not Mordenkainen. It is the vampire Kaz, who used to be Vecna's best buddy, but now they're huge rivals, and Cass is using an item called the Crown of Lies to perfectly impose as Mordenkainen in such a way where the Crown of Lies is written explicitly to say you can't penetrate through this with magic. It is impossible to tell that he's a fake by using magic or otherwise. It's like a very specific, nope, you can't skip this. But it is theoretically possible to realize that Mordenkainen is an imposter in the first meeting, and the book does have it out for it, but it's just like the whole thing's predicated on like no one being suspicious or everyone just being like, okay, I actually found it. We'll get to that when we get to that chapter, but like that's what this thing's really like set upon, is this Crown of Lies sort of gambit. And like there are elements at play where it's written up where it's like, okay, you're going to have to nudge the party kind of along into this if you want them to go through the whole thing. But it feels, I wouldn't say like a thin thread to run the whole thing on, but it feels kind of fragile, potentially, depending on who you have in the party and how investigative they are in their first meetings with people when we get to Sigil later on.
Mm-hmm. The kind of opening of the book is immediately spoiler heavy because a lot of the whole plot hinges on basically a twist. So if your players know that Mordenkainen isn't who he says he is, that kind of ruins like half the thing. For listeners who are more casual about the stuff, Mordenkainen was Gary Gygax's player character at the beginning of the game. He is kind of like one of the most famous existing characters. There's also there's like, I think they're called the Wizards 3, who are like this group of NPCs, 2 of whom are Ernest and one is a vampire in disguise. That's Cass, Kas. And so, yeah, they're basically telling the players what to do, and you listen to them through 10 chapters for, presumably like months of play. And at the end, one of them betrays the others, beats them up, and runs away. And that's kind of the thread. But in the meantime, they send you on these missions. So, yeah, my knee-jerk assumption is that players wouldn't question it too much, because if there's any of the 3 who would be suspicious, it would be Tasha, who is pretty spooky.
For sure. Unless somebody likes that, I mean, some people are like, listen,
Sure.
Tasha's a witch. Tasha's kind of cool,
Yeah. Tasha is kind of a beloved character. Both Mordenkainen and Tasha have gotten Magic the Gathering cards if you're trying to gauge their popularity. Although it is interesting because I think Tasha has a whole character arc who she went through in like the 90s or whatever. She's like a completely different character now, but they wanted the helpful, likable early version. It's kind of in an aside mentioned, oh, this Tasha was actually pulled from earlier in the timeline. It's like, wait, what? What do you mean?
That's actually not the first time that comes up also. I'm going to bring that up, actually.
Yeah, it's just such an offhanded thing where it's like, all right, you're going to go on the, this multiverse adventure to stop the evil Lich Vecna. Your quest givers are 3 wizards, one of whom was displaced from time. Anyway, off to the next thing. It's like, wait, what? That just seems like a bigger deal than it is.
There are a handful of like little hand waves like that made. It feels, what if Disney was designing, I don't know, a Dungeons and Dragons hotel where you did an immersive adventure for 2 days in which you were to fight Vecna by the end of it there. Hypothetically, if they were to make a hotel like that, that's what the tone of this kind of comes off with as times. I don't mean that derisively, but it has that type of feel of like, we got to show off all these different beats and such, and then we have to have rationalizations for why certain power levels are the way they are at these certain points there. Which is, I'm like, the people who designed this and actually wrote it, I'm pretty sure they were given a lot of very particular marching orders to pull it off. And despite some of our concerns about the railroadiness there, actually, there's a lot of fun things about this campaign overall once we get into some of the actual adventure components.
I know you brought up Disney because of the Jenny Nicholson video that just came out, completely dating this video, but it did remind me of Kingdom Hearts, which this whole adventure has a big feel of. It's like ostensibly Toy Story and like Hercules take place in the same timeline, right? Like ancient Greece to modern day, but like they occur concurrently for Kingdom Hearts purposes, if that makes sense.
If I knew any Kingdom Hearts references, I could be like, Vecna's like, who'd be the Vecna equivalent here,
Xehanort, yeah.
I was just
Xehanort.
It's like, oh my gosh, imagine someone doing like a fan rewrite that just turns this into Kingdom Hearts. You could honestly get away with that and be pretty funny.
It's not that far off. Honestly, if I did episode titles for the user review ones, I would just be like, this is the Kingdom Hearts of Dungeons and Dragons, because it is Xehanort in the land of nowhere or whatever, trying to do some kind of fuck-ass ritual, and you have to go to all these different themed worlds to blah, blah, blah. Yeah,
and most of the themed worlds do have like a tag-along character of some capacity, so that makes it even more Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah. Oh, God. Arriving in Kryn, and then fucking Kender shows up with this. It's voiced by James Corden, and it's like, God damn it, motherfucker. All right, so before you're technically summoned by these Wizards 3, we've mentioned a bunch of times, there is like a pre-adventure, and the book kind of suggests weaving this into like an ongoing campaign. It's like, here's a generic encounter with some boring cultists that inflicts a magic thing on your characters that they can go back to the other adventures and then get pulled into this one. And I think that's kind of clever. I like that as like a thing you can slip into otherwise. Like if your characters go from 1 to 9 and then you hit them with this.
Right. Yeah. And the opening arc takes place in Neverwinter. You are basically tasked to save some people who have been kidnapped by cultists over in the Neverdeath graveyard. And in the end, it turns out that this is the result of a cult of Vecna. And in your efforts of saving the last noble, you have to disrupt this ritual. And in doing so, you get junted into the Evernight. And you also get a link established between yourself and Vecna, basically acting like as a blessing of a god, which is a thing I'm kind of surprised. That's actually one of those mechanics that I don't see regularly invoked in official materials, at least in my brief reading. But it also is important because it ties into the primary mechanical gimmick of this campaign, which are secrets. So if any of you listen to the Planescape review, remember one of the principal gimmicks of that campaign are glitch characters because of the main framing device. In this environment, the whole focal point is on secrets, which have 2 basic uses in game. Let me go ahead and just pull up what the description of those are here. So when your characters are linked to Vecna, you can accrue secrets from people, and every chapter has like a handful of secrets that the characters can know. These are like codified in there. The characters know automatically when they learn of a secret of any note, and then at that point they have it as a currency. A player can spend a secret to make everyone in the party have advantage on all D20 rolls for a minute, and then there is a secondary use for them at the very end of the campaign. So it's like either you can use it for benefits now or benefit later. And that's all it is, basically.
So a lot of these adventures have kind of a unique gimmick mechanic, like Descent into Avernus had like you basically had your own car that you could
Right.
modify, and you had to collect these soul coins, which are like gasoline for it. Like you said, Planescape had the glitch stuff. This one, how does this strike you? Because I was reading this book and I was thinking about how my players would react, and I can already hear them trying to argue that anytime someone tells them something, they're like, "Austin, that's a secret." Like
Right.
they're like, "I think you should go. I think you
That's
should go left." And I was like, "Austin, that's a secret. They wouldn't have told me that unless I bullied them."
it's weird because it's like it's the fact of the matter is that it talks about specific characters having specific secrets that are applicable, and I'm like you said, just like how players will argue for things like, can I get inspiration for that? They might try to argue, does that count as a secret? And it's like, how much do you want to reveal behind the veil? Like, each chapter of the campaign, there's going to be no fewer than 2, but no more than 3 secrets you're going to be able to earn. So don't fish for them, fuckos.
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah, they are delineated at the beginning of each chapter. It's like during chapter 9, there are 2 secrets. It tells you up top what they are. So
yeah.
it's a very clear mechanic from the DM angle. And I guess you could just say to your players, like, hey, don't badger me about this. And I guess if your friends are cool, they won't. But that I was just imagining already, like Quinn just being like, Austin, that's a secret. Austin, give me advantage.
Can I not get advantage? Just instead have advantage for an entire minute? Is that I'll talk down from having advantage for 1 check for that. I will say that like one detail that's kind of neat is that for each character that has a secret, they list out a handful of different means by which you can accrue it. So for example, one of the characters in chapter 1 is this gnome Umberto Noblin. And to gain his secret, the easiest way to do so is just give him food created by a spell. So you just use good berry, give him a berry. He's just like, oh, okay. I will tell you my secret as a story. And I'm like, that's pretty silly, but I like it.
When I was reading that before it revealed that Goodberry was an option, I was definitely thinking that I would specifically disallow Goodberry because the opportunity cost is so low. I'd be like, no, you need to go get rare jerky or something, unicorn meat. I don't know, but like no, just a level 1 spell. It's like, oh, this guy is a cheap date. He'll give it up for nothing. It's like, okay, bud.
I'm going to cast my 3rd level spell, Good Jerky, and use that instead.
That's a much better spell.
Uh-huh. But yeah,
this secret mechanic, it doesn't strike me as inventive as some of the other ones we've seen. It's a little bit novel. Like I would never thought of secrets as being that mechanically interesting before. So like it is original. I'll give it that. And I do like at the end where you can't do the Final Fantasy thing where you beat the final boss with 99 elixirs in your inventory because they all just get blasted at the end, which is pretty good. But the whole idea that in the background of this 11 chapter adventure, Vecna is just in a cave somewhere doing a secret ritual. Not the most dynamic of things to me ultimately.
Right. I mean, I guess the big thing that is sort of signposted about like the purpose of the secrets is the fact that the cultists stole these individuals and are taking these secrets kind of like in a metaphysical sense and doing something beyond that from them. So it's meant to signpost the players that Vecna and secrets are closely tied even before you explain to the players what the power secrets are as a mechanic, because you are supposed to explicitly explain it to the players once they're linked to Vecna. But like, again, how do players respond? Are they just going to burn their secrets, whenever they feel like it? Or are they going to hoard them up? I think the game is able to work either way. It's less that you're punished for using them early. It's just that there are going to be things later on that are not going to be as advantageous if you burn them a bit early. One added thing I want to note about looking at chapter 1 is this adventure has some very detailed dungeon designs, like lots of rooms, lots of little hot spots for what's going on. Like in the first dungeon, there's like 26 markers for the first dungeon for notable locations. So
Yeah, I mean they have to fill up the pages somehow. This is a good way to kind of hit your word count, but also because you're playing with such high level players. Later, you basically have to kind of burn away their resources because if it's just like you walk into a room and there's like two goblins or whatever, they're gonna like turn this place into a fucking crater with their spells, you know. So you kind of got to put them through a gauntlet. So the higher level adventures, the more stuff you need in your dungeon.
I'm a little concerned that they have you start off in a water palace type puzzle because the Neverdeath Catacomb has like water pressure chambers that you can go in and manipulate, which changes water levels in different areas and stuff like that.
I was literally thinking that because then later there's a light reflection puzzle, and I was like, this is just like game design 101. This is just like they should have me pushing crates.
Oh gosh, like here's the Sokoban plane. Everyone just pushing crates.
Yeah, there's some fucking sewer levels in this bitch, let me tell you. But I think the first level is kind of supposed to be kind of generic. You know, they're just hooded cultists doing dark things. You find out that this adventure is about secrets, and that's okay. You stop the ritual and you get fucking yeeted into the bigger part of the adventure. This is where it starts. Do you have anything to say about that before we get to the next part?
I do like the three ways the fight can end. You can kill the cult leader, you can silence any of the fanatics, or attempt to free the last person you're trying to rescue. And any of those things is enough to ruin the ritual, which I'm just like, man, that's the plot-bearing prisoner, I guess, is just like, I like how even though it's attempt to free the final person there, Eldon, it's just like, oh,
Vecna's plans have a lot of very fragile failure points, let me say. There's a lot of chanting in rooms for weeks. If at any point someone sneezes, it's all ruined.
Also, one thing I'll point out about the way this campaign is set up here is that at the end of this, by the time you're junted after this first dungeon, everyone has their link to Vecna established. There then should be explained the power of secret, but also it means that for the rest of the campaign, everyone in the party has permanent advantage on insight checks. That is just by rule. So, useful, I guess.
I couldn't help but think of Hylia and her stone rune, which gives her advantage on insight checks, and how sad I would be that that's redundant for her. She would be so bummed.
Can I get something else? No, you can cast See Invisibility once per day for free. Now move along.
Such a bummer. But yeah, that whole section, you know, not anything to write home about, but it sets up. Actually, before I was going to say that sets up the Wizards 3, but it doesn't. You have to go to Evil Neverwinter,
yes,
which kind of cracked me up because it's like there's undead everywhere. It's so spooky. Anyway, you go to the one market with the one NPC and then leave. And it's like, okay, I know we have stuff to do, but that seems really rushing.
You go talk to a vampire and like, you know, she's just happy and willing to chat without any real issue there. Even explicitly says Sangora isn't looking for a fight. It's just like, okay, sure.
And I want to find this exact word where it says, like, if your attempts to go somewhere else, you don't.
Well, the funny thing about the Sangora meeting is the following line here. If the characters don't seem inclined to speak to her, Eldon blurts out a question about finding a crevice of dusk. It's just like your tag-along character allows the DM to sort of force the players to learn what they're supposed to do, which I've always find that a little silly to have in there, but there are reasons for things like this in campaigns. We want to keep things at a particular clip. I can imagine somebody being like, can we just stay in Evernight? This is kind of dope. I like this gloomier, you know, it's a little cozy, you know?
Yeah, the one market and the one graveyard that you can see, I guess. But I mean, yeah, this is the kind of adventure, it's not really even worth complaining about railroading, because that's just the kind of adventure it is. It's like going to a sandwich shop and being like, why is there bread in every meal? It's part of the thing you bought. But yeah, this is the one I wanted to quote. Other explorations of Evernight are both dangerous and fruitless, so you should eventually steer the party back to the market, even if they venture elsewhere. It's like a video game where it's like, there's no assets this way. Invisible wall, please turn back.
I'm just going to throw harder random encounters your way until you get the hit. Oh, you're not getting the hit. Oh, no.
I mean, in theory, the reason to play a tabletop game instead of a video game is the infinite possibilities. So it's kind of a bummer. If I was running this, I would just make up some shit for a while, I
I'm
guess.
sorry, Austin. The only infinite I care about is infinite experience. Come on, just get those numbers up. Come on.
Oh yeah, I should say this is another adventure with milestone leveling. You get a level at the end of each chapter of the book, and so there is no incentive to engage with every monster you see. You might as well sneak past. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, or talk, right? And that actually is played into the advantage of some of the designs. Like the other notable named NPC during chapter 1, once you're in Evernight, is Numi. And Numi, once again, it's just like, it starts off, Numi would rather talk than fight. You know?
Yeah, Numi gets, what, 2 paragraphs max, and they move on, never mentioned again. And I was like, oh, if this was a Dice Funk, campaign or character, this would be a fucking fan favorite. Everyone would be making Numi merch. It'd be every episode, where's Numi?
Yeah, people would be pounding the table. When Numi's not on camera, people should be asking, where's Numi?
Yeah, she's a cute little ghost for the audience. But the thing about these books is they kind of have to constantly introduce new characters because they can't ever ensure that when you say, like, here's an elf, he has a dark secret, oh, you killed him. It's like the book kind of glitches out if a character is needed later in the story and they died earlier, or you were such a dick to them, it doesn't make any sense for them to help you. So basically every chapter has to introduce a whole new menagerie of people, and that's just part of the I don't know any way around that.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I want to really mention before we get to the end of chapter 1 is the puzzle door, because of course there's a puzzle door at some point in this little adventure here. You're presented with that has an inscription, and it says Dolindor, world to no return. And you're supposed to push one letter from each word to spell out the correct key phrase to open the door. If you fail to do so, you take damage. And I like how this not only allows people to try a few times, there's hints you can get for stuff, but there's also a DC 16 sleight of hand check you can do to just pick the lock if you can't solve the puzzle, which is just like, DC 16 at level 10 should not be that difficult for if there's anyone with sleight of hand proficiency or thieves tools and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how many players actually do enjoy the puzzles as written. Because if you listen to Dice Funk, we don't really do puzzles that often, even though they are a traditional element of the game. Usually, something like a riddle in this season is the closest we get, or it's just try to pick the lock, and if you can't, break the door down, or ask an NPC or something. I don't do there are 6 orbs of different colors, and each orb has a key, and each key has a letter. That's just
yeah.
It's audio poison.
Yeah, I mean, I did that in the very first episode of Shard Point, but even then, I try to keep the puzzle designs a little light. I think the closest thing that you do in the form of puzzles are basically you set up encounters or scenarios where lateral thinking is encouraged to use resources in unique ways, rather than here's a puzzle with a singular solution that you have to glean out there. And that's not that there's anything wrong with that. I think that the puzzle itself is fine. It's just one of those things where, thankfully, there is a way to get through the door quickly with a sleight of hand check in case the party is either disinterested or struggling with the puzzle there.
I also find it a little too gamey, if that makes sense. I know it is literally a game, but I try to create worlds which have some verisimilitude with, within the bounds of goblins and shit. But you know what I mean? It's question is who built this puzzle and why? It just seems like a huge waste of time and energy to make a fucking Simon Says thing in your tomb, but maybe they just have a different culture than I do.
I like the idea of you go to someone's tomb. It's you see their nest lock on their door. You must enter in 3 sets of numbers: their birth date, their death date, and their favorite number. It's
and I go home. I say, never mind. Fuck this. I'm gonna go back to the market and talk to that vampire.
So yeah. At the end of all of this here, it points out that the players are all given homes in Neverwinter, and then basically the players are kind of allowed to kind of do what they want. You're actually encouraged to have the players kind of describe what they do afterwards, right? They could be doing some adventuring in the interim. This could take place immediately. It could take years, place years after the initial chapter, which is, it's one of those things where the trouble with campaigns like this is you're trying to instill urgency, but not do too aggressive a railroading in terms of pacing. So, but like the fact that they have like a table of options for interim events, like what are things that happen to your characters between helping Lord Neverember and now you're going to get junted into a sigil.
You can run this number of ways. You can have it be your characters go back to whatever they were doing before the cultists. It could just be a paragraph of description, or you could just go right to it. I think that's pretty clever and makes this fit more naturally because everything from here on out is like Vecna related or like, MacGuffin quest related. So if it's like,
Yes,
if one of the characters is like, I need the sacred sword of my family to avenge my village's destruction, it's like, well, there's not any time for that. So you need to wrap that up before we do this other shit because it's just we're not getting off the train.
I forgot to feed my cat. I'm sorry, Kibako. You're doing your own thing right now. Hope your cat lives.
Yeah. So at this point, whenever you decide it's time to do Vecna stuff, you get summoned by the Wizards 3. You don't know one of them is an evil vampire. And this is like the first... I'm going to do a lot of nitpicking here. This isn't like an actual like criticism in like a meaningful way, but I don't know why they set this part in Sigil. I know it looks like it's spelled sigil, but it's supposedly pronounced Sigil, which is explicitly a place where portals are extremely regulated. You're not supposed to be able to open a portal or the immortal invincible Lady of Pain turns your asshole inside out. And they're like, okay, so these wizards summon you. They have a bunch of portals they set up, but it's just like anywhere else. Why? What is happening here? I know there's a little box that says maybe the Lady of Pain didn't notice or doesn't care. It's like, just do something else. I don't know. Like I said, not a real criticism. I'm being annoying.
I guess the other point there is like you end up back in Planescape for 2 other arcs later on, effectively. So, right. The thing with Sigil is like the thing I find fascinating is that this has also almost like a Powers Ranger-esque sort of thing. Like the players are just jumping from wherever they are because the Wizards 3 try to cast a wish spell, but one of them sabotages it without the others realizing.
This is one of those things where it's like spellcasters who are NPCs don't have to follow the rules because what does 3 people casting wish mean? Like there's not a mechanic for combining spells.
Yeah, it's like it's weird because also if I'm looking at like some of the stat blocks here, looking at the number of hit dice each of these people have, I'm like, okay, how many hit dice does, let's say, Tasha have? Tasha has 28 hit die, which implies to me that Tasha is a level 28 wizard. So Tasha should just have wish just available to use.
This is one of those like convenient, like we're doing a greatest hits. People want to see Tasha. It's fine things. Yeah. So not like actually annoyed about it, but it does seem weird to make your kind of whole campaign center around this ritual that doesn't make a ton of in-game sense. Cass is a vampire swordsman, not a magician, so he doesn't contribute, and everyone gets knocked down. They're all like winded as you appear in their house.
Yeah, and in terms of another like greatest hits thing, we should mention that the third wizard is Illustriel Silverhand, right? So she is like the third of the wizards that are there.
She doesn't have a magic heart, so she means nothing to me. Absolutely.
The premise is everyone gets pulled in after this wish spell has failed, and Mordecai's like, Cass is like, I have an idea. I had a contingency in case this didn't work. We could use the Rod of 7 Parts, in fact, to take care of Vecna. You all have a connection with Vecna. You should go get all the pieces now.
I would definitely have them make a lot more small talk before launching into that because it's extremely suspicious for him to have this extremely elaborate backup plan already.
Yep.
But then this is another thing where if your players are familiar with the history of D&D, they'll be like, "Oh, the Rod of Seven Parts. This is like a classic thing." And
Yes.
if your players don't know, they'll be like, "We got to get a stick. What is that? What this is about? Is this the fucking stick of truth? Well, like, what are you talking about?"
Yes, this and to be fair, the Rod of Seven Parts, to be clear, was like, according to the Wikipedia article, one of the first like named artifacts designed, and like the concept of like, hey, here's a magic item broken up into several parts that you need to reconstruct. This was conceived in the 70s, so before video games were a big thing. So people nowadays are like, this is old hats. Like, you're right, it's older than you probably, player.
Yeah, so as the 50th anniversary, they're going back to a lot of classic stuff. I'm just also reading from the Wikipedia page. The first book with Rod of Seven Parts was Eldritch Wizardry from 1976, which also introduced the Druid character class. So this Rod is as old as Druids.
If I'm not mistaken, the Druid character class in Advanced First Edition, I have to get this because I think it's very silly, is basically the way you do it is you have to be a rogue fighter. Oh, no, that's right. I'm thinking about the Bard class in First Edition AD&D, where you have to be like a rogue, then dual class into fighter, then dual class into druid, and then your druid levels count as your bard levels. And so it's just like, it's a weird like prestige class unlock to go through for that. But that's a earlier D&D has some wild ideas. My favorite detail about that era, by the way, is that for every level in particular character classes, you did not say you were like an X level fighter. You had a specific title for every single level of character that you were. So for wizard, each level was just a different school of magic. Your penultimate class before you were a wizard was necromancer. So you just have a necromancer phase in your adventuring, I guess.
Gary was such a weird little guy. I'm looking at this Eldritch Wizardry book also introduced demons to the game, including the Demogorgon for Stranger Things fans, as well as psionic monsters such as the Mind Flayer. So a very important book, this Eldritch Wizardry. But also the Rod of Seven Parts would make a triumphant return in 1996 as a book called The Rod of Seven Parts, which this whole adventure is kind of a pastiche of.
Right. The Rod of Seven Parts was actually an adventure by Skip Williams in the 90s. And it was actually, what's interesting is that some people noted, like, that was 4 books, but this is just 1 book. It's like, well, The Rod of Seven Parts was 4 books, but each book had a different purpose, and its total page count was like just north of 200 pages, and this is like over 250. So like potato. But yeah, that's what this is effectively a pastiche of. Even invokes certain NPCs that are referenced in that campaign as well. So
the publishing industry has changed a lot, so it would be weird if it was exactly the same. But yes.
I was gonna say, it's kind of funny though, because the Spelljammer campaign is kind of similar to the Rod of Seven Parts book, because it's like a box set of multiple books, each with a specific purpose and such there. So it's changed, but not completely, I guess.
It depends on the needs of the product. Spelljammer is
Right.
weird enough that it feels like you need more table setting, where this one is, you're as we're about to discuss. Basically, these wizards send you through a series of portals into like AAA video game set pieces. It's like they're very small, like little bespoke things you kind of interact with before going back to the hub.
Now, I have to point out this. There is an extended section of Chapter 2 about what if the players preemptively figure out the Mordenkainen's Kaz. It requires, at a minimum, 2 DC 30 investigation checks to be passed, one of which has to be done over an hour, and then an additional history check of DC 20. And then there's an additional sidebar of if they find out, it's like, okay, either Kaz kills the characters effectively, and then they get resurrected and then sent off to find the 7 parts by the others, hopefully. Or if they defeat Kaz, it's like, if the fake characters defeat Kaz, allow them to decide how to proceed. They might still want to assemble the Rod of Seven Parts used against the Lich God. However, to reinforce the story's sense of urgency, feel free to skip ahead to Chapter 10.
This, yeah, in case you have a Dan in your group who like read about some obscure thing where you're like, if you get rid of his legendary resistances, you can turn him into a newt and put him in a goat jar or something. So you have to prepare for that.
Yeah, you could murder hobo your way past 8 chapters of campaigning, I guess.
If you want to. I don't know why you bought the book then, but what are we doing here? So yeah, you've been given your quest. You need to find the 7 pieces of this famous rod, which it's not okay. It is clear to me, having read the whole adventure, like why this is working this way. But to the players, it seems like a lot of running around to fight one guy. You know what I'm saying? What do you think this was overly complicated? Because Cass's plan is for you to do this, I don't know, weeks or months long adventure so that he can put the rod in a hole to free his friend so him and his friend can jump Vecna.
Right.
Why go through all that trouble when, like, doesn't he have other friends? Why is it so important to get this one guy out of jail?
I mean, one, because Mishka is like the central figure for the Rod of 7 Parts, right? That's kind of like the thing. So it's one
Because
of those
it's
things
a
that
reference, yeah.
Right. So basically, here's the thing, right? If a player is savvy enough, they might hear Rod of 7 Parts. I'm like, I wonder if it has anything to do with Mishka. Imagine if they said that out loud in front of Mordekainen for some reason. And Cass is just like, shit. Anyways, here's the Chime of Exile. You should take it from Illustrial. This will be important for you later on.
Yeah, this will be helpful in our journey. Yeah, it's a series of like references. So if you know that Miska the wolf spider, who's a super demon, who's in super duper double jail, is a whole thing, and then you could like guess ahead in the plot, but that's a lot. If you know about the Chimes of Exile, if you know about X and Y, it's like, yeah, you can jump ahead.
Yeah, and then and I also like, it's interesting how sometimes. It's like if the characters wish to take the chime with them, Illustrial assents. And just like nice extra, nice special little bit of word usage there. But yeah, also it's interesting looking at this in D&D Beyond, because for every notable item or stat block for this campaign, there's a bunch of people in the comments, not necessarily bickering, but kind of like scrutinizing other details about it. Like with the Chime of Exile, they're like, does this apply to legendary resistances? Because that'd be a little weird for that to be the case. You get someone down to 50 hit points or fewer, use Chime of Exile, and like, aha, not yet, try again. Aha, not yet, try again. Oh, shoot, you got me a third time. I'll see you next time, as they get sent off away.
That's a thing like a DM has to like gauge in the moment. Is this worth arguing about, or should we go to the next part because someone's on their phone?
Mm-hmm. But then we are sent, but in the chapter 2, we're also sent off to get the first piece of the Rod of 7 Parts by one of the handy dandy portals from inside Sigil. We go to Web's Edge to, deal with devotees of Loth and get the first rod piece.
From here on out, it's a series of greatest hits chapters. We're going to go through portals to famous locations with famous villains. Loth is the first. She is the spider goddess who's, classic and beloved. She will come in at the end, and this isn't super important. We don't need to split hairs. Why does Loth have any affinity for Vecna? They work together at the end. There's like a whole battle scene. How does the spider goddess benefit from Vecna rewriting all of reality with secret energy, which is what he's doing?
The only thing I could imagine is that, they had made an agreement that where Loth is like, don't write anything embarrassing about me during these things here, and that'll be okay. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm on board. It's like, can you make me look cool in your new history? All right, sweet. Let's do this thing.
You can definitely trust Vecna to keep his word. A trustworthy guy. What? It just makes her seem like a moron, right? He's so freaking evil. It doesn't make... Okay, whatever. Nitpicking.
Let's see here. Oh, yes. Yes, we have a spider dragon as one of our main features of this chapter, which is it's a very cool thing to be able to have, like spider dragon. Like weird alternate dragon types are pretty cool, and spider dragon is pretty dope looking, I think.
I'll get like other systems monster manuals, bestiaries. Like I'll pick up a Pathfinder book, even though I don't play Pathfinder, just to see the monsters. Like that's where I'm at. So like a personal bias is if I'm gonna seem down on this book, it's just because there's not enough little freaks for me. And here, yeah, it's you see drow, you see driders and stuff. It's fine. The only interesting wrinkle here is that a lot of this part of the quest seems stealth or social dependent, which I like because it's like, oh, these are all highly elite demon worshipping assassins. You don't want to just start fighting people here. So that's the kind of stuff we do on Dice Funk usually. Is more about talking it out. So I like that. There's going to be whole sections of this where it's like you need to grind through this castle for 3 hours, and it's
Right.
like I would never run this at all.
That is actually one thing I want to say that I do like about this is that the fact that each chapter's arc, especially when you're gathering the parts, the Rod of 7 parts, each chapter basically has a different style of adventure. So in some ways, this feels like one of those things like Tales from the Yawning Portal, where it's a bunch of disconnected adventures, and each adventure has a certain style or tone. Except in this case, this is all done with a single thread through piece being the Rod of 7 parts.
It's impossible for me not to think of the Adventure Zone, the actual play podcast, who their first and most successful season is a series of disconnected adventures to acquire 7 MacGuffins.
Right.
It is like it's really similar, which is fine. Like there's different ways to do a campaign. On Dice Book, we tend to do single locations where it's like we're going to spend 40 episodes in Grendel or 40 episodes in Valentine, and I like that. It lets everyone get deeper into like the culture and the NPCs they like. But we've done some other modes. Our post-apocalyptic season was like more of a road trip and stuff. So there's nothing wrong with the MacGuffin quest.
Sure.
It just has a lot of downsides. You're not going to get returning NPCs. You're not going to get a great sense of like any particular place or like space, and the upsides and downsides.
The last detail I'll have about Chapter 2 is that any and all the images that have Mordekainen in them, they make him look suspicious as fuck, so you can't use those as handouts for your players. Like, literally, the first picture at the top of Chapter 2, you look at this, you're like, Mordecai is doing up to something here. Like, he's in shadow, he's smirking, he has the eyebrow arch. It's like... It's just like... It's
a shame you never see his dog either. That's a huge giveaway for me that it's not the real Mordecai.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Like, like where's the doggo? It's like, he's out having a walk around Sigil. He'll be back, I swear.
Yeah, we kind of glanced over this, but the crown he's wearing that lets him be completely undetectable by normal means is just kind of a thing that is written in there. It's a plot device, but like I don't think the players ever are necessarily aware of it, right? Like there's no reason for them to know about the crown.
Not until like the moment that things are revealed, but right. But like, let's kind of get to my point here. Like, we go to the Crown of Lies entry as magic items. The first line is, after betraying and nearly destroying the Lich Vecna, the warrior Cass found himself trapped in the Shadowfell, imprisoned in a domain of dread called Tovog. And you're like, what does this have to do with the Crown of Lies? And it's like, oh. It also then explains about like how this whole thing is for that campaign. It's like, and there are people who complain about how both this and the Rod of 7 parts, the descriptions are directly tied to just this campaign, and that's something that I think is a bit of an oversight in how these things are formatted for something like D&D Beyond, when you can just search up magic items without any knowledge that they're going to be telling you plot points for a campaign. That's a user experience thing that I have to take umbrage with.
I hadn't even thought of that, but I imagine it's hard to do this kind of unified system because you want the items and the characters to kind of exist piecemeal, but also cohesively. So that's a difficulty. Before we get to the next piece of the Rod of 7 parts, because each piece tells you where the next piece is, this is kind of a convenience. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but that's how it works in the adventure.
I believe that is actually canonical to how it worked originally, though. I mean, that is actually part of the original design. So that is at least the verisimilitude is there for it. There's established mechanics for that.
I do want to say in the background, it doesn't really give you too much guidance on this, but you kind of need to be giving your players like Vecna visions, I guess you could say, because Vecna straight up is not going to appear until the last page of this motherfucking book. So he has no screen time. There's no like dialogue, no personal, like you just need to be making that up yourself.
And people might be thinking, well, if we have a link to Vecna, does that mean Vecna is aware of us? No, the book explicitly says Vecna is not aware of the players. The players are aware of Vecna, though. I guess Vecna is just accidentally sending group texts to the group chat, but forgets that they're still part of it somehow.
Yeah, he doesn't know that Twitter circles have been discontinued, so he thinks it's a private channel. Basically, for this whole thing to work, there has to be like an excuse, a workaround. Basically a reason why people don't just call up Elminster or whatever. Why don't they get the real hitters in here to take care of it? It's because like only the people with this connection to Vecna can make it work. So you just happen to luck into that, but they can't make the connection too strong, or otherwise Vecna would just teleport to where you are and turn you inside out. So it's kind of they have to toe a line, or you're special but not too special. Difficult.
You're not too special yet. Even though Mordecai says you will be the heroes of the multiverse. Just like
it's laying that out there. That you kind of have to just accept that 3 of the most powerful magic users spend this entire campaign in a house together, just kind of like picking at their food or whatever, waiting for you to get back. They don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, you know what? Gosh, this season of The Real World really shows how far MTV has fallen when it comes to their ideas. Sure,
So the second piece is our next big hit. You loved Lolth. How do you feel about Spelljammer? We're back. I know it's only been like two book releases, but
I had a friend, when I mentioned this chapter to a friend, they were like, well, okay, so they need to know much about spell jamming, stuff like that. And the answer is no. This solves that problem for you, because it's like, it kind of hand waves worrying too much about the mechanics of being in the astral sea and such there.
Yep, you teleport to a shipwreck in the astral sea. It's technically a spaceship, but it doesn't matter because this could be a nautical shipwreck for all it actually like is implicated in the mechanics or whatever, and you have to like discuss stuff going on with a couple different characters who are in this shipwreck. One person is a disguised Slod. That's kind of a fun little twist, but I'm trying to think of anything specific here. Oh, was this no, it's a later one, I think. There's something I wanted to bring up, but no, it's not yet.
One thing I really like about it is the actual map design for the Lambeth Zenith. Like, you can see how like it has, like, when you look at the wreckage from the top-down view and the interaction with Havoc, the Heart of Havoc, rather, and stuff like that.
Disappointed it's not the Mortal Kombat character Havoc, who I believe also has an exposed heart.
Mm-hmm. I think so. That might be the case.
It's spelled the same. Sorry.
Yeah. It's fair enough. Like, but yeah, this one here is interesting because like this is a very much like chat with people, try to figure out like what's going on, what's the backstory, what happened around here, why is this one person being skittish and kind of hiding away in their room and stuff. In the case of Figaro, and I actually just realized there is, I'm trying to remember here, there is, you have a Slod, and then you have a Coatl, right? Who's also someone in disguise on the ship, effectively. So you have like 2 entities that are like imposing as other characters, which is neat. Like, there's some fun things you have discussion-wise going on in there. Honestly, my favorite detail is the treant that is on a lifeboat that is crashed into the ship that you can chat with and they reveal that they're protecting a blink dog that's underneath them. That my favorite part about the blink dog in the lifeboat is it just says right here, Ikasa the Blink Dog is outfitted with a magical collar that allows him to speak common. They just add that right away because they want you to talk to the dog here. And it's just like, upon seeing the characters, Ikasa excitedly bounds over and introduces himself. Just like, just, I don't know. That just tickles me. It's just like, here's a Blink Dog. Normally, people look at these as like, you know, like kind of weird things. But like this one's just like, it's just a little guy. Just happy to chat up.
Yeah, the book doesn't go into it too specifically, but Blake dogs are actually a fae thing and not dogs, but they look like dogs. But this has some of the best NPCs in the thing. There's a GIF captain of the ship, as there always is. It's a classic thing. I won't say Laura really brought that back into the public consciousness. And there's a one-winged angel, which, you know, classic style. And then there's the dead god. This is a, you know, existing bit of lore that there's the bodies of the dead dying gods in the astral sea. I took that kind of for an encounter near the end of season 6 where they would fight on a big god's body and stuff. So pretty classic, greatest hits. It's fine. There's no nothing too surprising here. You fight a big monster and you get the second piece.
Yep. You go into a map called the Heart of Havoc, which just is literally designed as a heart. It even has a caved-in artery, and it has another creature that is introduced in this book, the Hurtalod, which is from this book specifically. Main details about this that anything notable here. Nothing too wild. I like how one of its legendary actions is just called Feed. It just, but basically, the rod is inside the Hurtalod's belly. You have to get it to like regurgitate it or go in there and cut your way out, I guess, or something. So like, that's another classic sort of beat there. Like, oh, the MacGuffin is swallowed by the enemy in here.
I don't remember Hurtalods existing before. They kind of look like, you know, like long-necked dinosaurs. The description says they ain't dragons, they ain't lizards. Oh no, they're much worse, which I think is kind of lampshading that there's always so much design space for like original creatures. So that, yeah, they are a little lizardy, but they do have, I don't know, is this, you think, heart-based? The fact that they have a susceptibility to shock. If they take lightning damage, they have to succeed on a Constitution saving throw, or they throw up all their stuff. Is that like you know, the paddles that they use on someone who's flatlined?
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, imagine if someone used like shocking grasp in that style. I would honestly give it disadvantage on its save if someone did that with shocking grasp. Like rub their hands together and says clear before. Like, imagine someone jumping into the mouth, into the belly, and then doing that from inside. That'd be very fun to lean into and stuff like that. Like, yeah, like it's a cute detail to add, and like I said, plays well into like the fact that you're inside basically an actual heart for a map. So it's like, yeah, it's a fun chapter. I think this is also a pretty good like first step after the initial endeavors when you're first like really junted out into a full chapter in a very different campaign setting that's not like Forgotten Realms adjacent. Actually, I forgot to note, all the way back in the introductory chapter, underneath the topic of Kaz's plan, it explicitly outlines each pieces of the rod, where they are located, and even tells you which campaign setting that is meant to invoke. So, like, it gives you a nice top-down view. Okay, we got Forgotten Realms, Spelljammer, and then the other ones are kind of outlined there. So, like, it does at least a decent job of telling you in advance, okay, these are where you're going. One setting we do not visit is Dark Sun. We do not visit Dark Sun at all. It does not exist here.
Stop asking about Dark Sun. It focus tested poorly. I don't know if we mentioned each part of the rod has its own abilities, and then when you put it together, you get its other abilities. It's a really powerful weapon, like too much, basically. So by the time you're level 20, I guess you can fucking do whatever. So who cares?
Some people had complaints about the rod because the types of spells that it does are different than older versions of the rod. Like, from my understanding, the last piece traditionally did the spell Heal. Its current version, the last spell is Simulacrum, which is like, okay, you can make clones of yourself. Cool. But yeah, once you're done with the Spelljammer chapter with the Lambeth Zenith's last voyage, you go back to Sigil, and then you are sent off to All right, the next campaign setting, which is Eberron.
I don't know if the audience knows Eberron. I believe was designed as like part of a contest. It's like it was
Yes.
like a what's the word I'm looking for? Like not crowdfund. It was like it was like a help us.
Yeah. So it was there was a design contest. I'm trying to remember what year it was. This was back in 2002. So Wizards of the Coast had a contest for campaign settings, and they supposedly had, according to Wikipedia entry, 11,000 submissions, and Keith Baker's campaign setting of Eberron was the one that was chosen. And Eberron, I think, has been a pretty strong favorite. The fact that it's included here, kind of speaks to it. But I think it also speaks to the fact that I think every campaign setting we're going into are ones that have had official books made about them in some capacity during 5th editions. That also tracks for reasons. But I also just love the art that opens up this chapter. It is very, very good. I'm like,
I know that Eberron has an existing aesthetic. It's not like this comes from nowhere, but it has to be at least a little near Automata flavored, right? I'm not insane.
At least the version of this art here for the Rune Colossus, absolutely. Like, I get that feeling, and I'm all here for it. It is really cool looking. So one of the things I find is actually kind of an added silly detail is that because of these different campaign settings, locations, and such, each chapter has to have a bit of an introduction to explain how rules work differently here. So in particular, there's a section about how since you're in the Mournland, magic doesn't work as intended. And so there's a subheading called regional effects that say, like, for example, divination magic doesn't work correctly. Your rod of 7 parts doesn't point to the exact location of the 3rd piece, so you need to use some other methods of finding it there and stuff while you're in Mount Ironrot.
The gimmick of Eberron is it's a bit more technologically advanced than normal D&D. There are robots and trains, but a lot of it, other details are still around medieval, and there has recently been a kind of apocalyptic event that didn't fall out the entire universe. There's like a zone of exclusion. There's like a Chernobyl exclusion zone, and that's where you're going with all these dead mechs. So I think this is one of my favorites. I think the like non-Euclidean geography of this, where you're kind of just going from Gundam to Gundam, is pretty sick.
Right. They make a note here about how while you're traveling around in Mount Ironrot, there's no distances listed on the map because the distances are non-deterministic. Like, so every time you travel somewhere, you have to roll 2d4 to determine the number of hours. And if somebody fails a survival check, you double that time, which is just, sure, you know?
You can tell this is something I fuck with because I had the players come across a dead Gundam in season 7. I didn't think to make it so big that it could be a dungeon. That's pretty clever. I was thinking more of real robot scale, but.
I also like how even with that big dungeon kind of at the end of it, there's still a little bit of time for people to kind of explore the area, meet some various NPCs and groups. Be able to interact with Warforged, which I'm always a fan. I'm a big fan of Warforged. That's one of the reasons why I like Eberron conceptually, because it introduced Warforged and Changelings and Kalashstars, which is just like great options and stuff like that to go with.
Yeah, there's some good art of the Warforged, just a couple with cool paint jobs. There's one that, unless I am the stupidest person alive, is definitely meant to evoke the DC character Deadshot, the orange and black one. Am I losing my mind?
Glaive? Are you talking about Glaive?
I am talking about Glaive, yeah.
Yeah. Glaive, what I find cute about it is that Glaive is explicitly coded as she, which is I think cool that they actually lean into the fact that Warforged can just be self-determined on their gender. Like, somebody might look at Glaive and not realize that, she's she, but again, cool detail there, full marks. Glaive looks like a pretty fun little menace to deal with there, so I'm kind of on board with that. I will say this: there are a good number of fun little like villain NPCs that have been designed around in here, and I think it's and again, there's lots of things. I think this is one of my favorite chapters, along with you. Just like the The art is really, really evocative. The space is kind of interesting and weird and foreign. And I think that it adds a fun little detail where you just don't go directly to where the rod is and then basically have to just solve a puzzle. You have to do an extra quest to even figure out where the rod piece is, and then you can go to the giant colossus called Landro to dungeon your way through it there.
The first exploration part also introduces you to two factions who want different things, and you kind of have to mediate. That's a classic situation. I do this all the time on Dice Funk. We recently had during the Riddlesnake arc where I had two different people fighting, and you had to help them resolve it or pick one side. I like that setup a lot. And after you do that, you get sent to the mech. So big, it's a dungeon. And I do want to say on the topic of good antagonists or villains, like the Spelljammer one has the defibrillator lizard, I guess, as we talked about, which is fine. But the end here, I think, is probably one of the stronger ones that isn't just remember Strahd. I mean, if Landro exists previously, I guess I don't know it. But I think his whole stuff's pretty clever. I think it's kind of a reference to Prometheus, with that liquid stuff that the alien pours. Do you know what I'm talking about?
A little bit. Yeah. A little bit. But
yeah, there's this silver liquid inside of Landro. It does you terrible psychic damage if you drink it, but it's like a living fluid, and then it kind of forms a guy you can talk to who is a manifestation of the mech. A lot of stuff going on here. It's kind of gross and cool.
What I also do like about the art for the art for the very end, we get to what's called the gray matter engine, which is this brain inside of the Colossus, which is just oh man, that's a cool little set piece there. What I find interesting about it is that if you get there, as far as I can tell, Landro themselves they don't actually want to fight you. They regard you kind of with interest and such, and ultimately, the way you kind of deal with it, I believe you transfer Landro's essence into a crystal to gem to take it out of the Colossus, and then it causes obviously a load bearing consciousness, because the whole thing blows the F up once you trigger that part of the sequence there.
Yep, a classic collapsing dungeon situation. We love to see it. So yeah, this is...
Oh, my mistake. Yeah, the collapse happens because we take the rod piece. The rod piece is what's powering the engine in the first place, and that causes the whole thing to collapse. So no matter what, you have to blow the whole thing up, which is a shame, because I'm sure some people can we restore this? Just pal around in our giant Gundam. Can we do that, please?
Showing up to Vecna in the fucking RX-78.
Oh man, can you imagine?
He would not survive a single round against the beam sword. I'm sorry. He's just a guy. But yeah, so that whole section, pretty good. I don't know if our tone is coming across. I think you and I, we have only briefly discussed this before during the recording. It seemed like maybe a little negative, not spitting venom, but a little negative into it. So I don't know, that seems like a high point. Next, we talked about Strahd already. We said one of the most iconic, one of the most famous evil vampire. He's basically just Dracula.
Yes.
I'm not trying to be mean, but yeah, it's not.
No,
nothing
he basically is, and that's fine. I mean, so so the next chapter has us in Barovia. So this is our Ravenloft chapter, but we don't go to Castle Ravenloft because, as far as I can tell, this is meant to be before the Curse of Strahd campaign, which some people have noted creates a weird thing where if you do Curse of Strahd, beat Strahd up or whatever else, and then you come back, and then he is a weaker version of himself by the stat block basis, at least. Which is...
You have to do Austin Power rules. You can't go cross-eyed on this stuff. All these... It's like a Batman, right? Batman was invented in a world when women couldn't open up bank accounts, and now he came of age in a world with the internet. You just have to accept that time is warped and space is bendable. So...
What I do like about this particular arc is that once you get into the Death House, which is just fine name, no problems there.
Yeah, is Death House an existing location? Because I laughed out loud at that. I was like, it can't be called Death House.
Let's see here. Doing
a quick Google for Death House.
Yeah, I do see an entry here. Yes, Death House was a level 1 through 3 adventure. At least I see one area here. That's a fandom page though. So like, I see people also noting like running Death House as a way into Barovia. So Death House is like a fairly iconic thing. And yeah, no. Here's the thing. So Death House I see as an official introductory campaign by Chris Perkins. So yes, this is meant to be evoking that type of thing. So yeah, Death House is a thing. And to be fair, Death House does sound like something that would be like a kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, listen, we're doing like, we're doing spooky horror stuff there. But like, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah.
like it's one of those things where you might think this seems like a phoning in. No, this is actually a reference as well. So I think for someone running this campaign, if you do not already know the references, double check to make sure what the references are, so you aren't caught off guard when your player gets a reference that you don't already know of.
The world is so full of different things to know. I feel like I spent the last 10 years reading old D&D books, and even I am constantly surprised by shit. So who knows? I assume we're going to miss some. Let us know in the comments if we're like, you fucking assholes. Landro is my favorite character. I can't believe you did him like that.
Landro shot first. Wait, no. Anyways, one of the things I also find fun about Death House is the fact that this is one of those adventures where you have a tag-along NPC in Sarasanda. In fact, they have when you're going through the Death House, you have a little table of encounters you need to roll, and they explicitly note that if you roll 1 through 4, you're going to meet with Sarasanda, and they have 3 separate meetings to do. So you're basically kind of going around to this fairly cramped little mansion that has this cult inside of it, and gosh, this has like over 30, has 38 points of interest on the map there. So it's a really dense little dungeon here.
The entire thing takes place, mostly in this house. There's a little introductory part where like a mob of villagers confronts you because they think you're bad, and you can disperse them in a number of different ways, and then you go to the house, and that's really the whole thing. So yeah, it is very dense. It reminded me a little bit of the beginning of season 3, where I put you in a spooky house full of skeletons. But that, it's very like Halloween, Halloween style.
I could almost imagine if someone's a really big fan of like Innistrad, they could throw some other elements from Innistrad in here and it'd be completely fine, especially because it opens up with like a bunch of villagers coming after you. That speaks very Innistrad to me in terms of tone.
Innistrad is 100% a Barovia riff. I mean,
sure,
they got there first.
Yeah.
What's interesting to talk about here? There's a number of different little things you can get into. There's these like spooky rooms that take you to like a demi-plane where you have to interact with something. You're basically just walking around until there's like a ritual. This is a common recurring element here. Maybe a bit too much for my liking, but cultists are doing a ritual. I mean, that's what cultists do, I guess.
Yes. I mean, listen, Aren't we engaging in some weird ritual when we meet up once or twice a week to do something as cultists?
It depends on your perspective.
All little cultists. Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it's a very recurring element in the story. It's like, how do we have something that's like it's occurring and there's a ticking clock, but also it takes however long it takes. It's like people in hoods chanting in a room is right. The constant refrain.
There are basically 3 principal acts with Death House. The opening act, which is very short, which is before you go into the Death House. Act 2 is the Death House up until you get the 4th rod piece after dealing with the cultists. And then the final act, which is Strahd shows up and then rooms become haunted. And now this is when I think the biggest gimmick related to the place happens, which is now you need to escape the Death House.
Yeah, Mr. Bones' wild ride starts, and when you enter a room, it gives you like a tableau with a thing you have to interact with. Like, you have to find you find yourself in a graveyard. You have to find your own grave and get in to get out. Is an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in each room has their own little puzzle with a correct or incorrect way of getting out of the room. And, at least the thing moves forward if you fail. But I can imagine a party just failing every exit would be kind of hilarious. Just like they're just so inept at going through certain things. Like,
there is a consequence. You take like psychic damage and stuff. You think you get exhaustion.
Like example, one of the haunting rooms is the ghostly recital. The correct exit, it requires somebody performing a DC 14 performance check, which I'm just like, for characters that are now like what level 13, 14, I think at this point here, you would hope that someone can do that. But if you fail, Strahd shows up, and a ruler shows up and just hammers out a series of chords, and people take thunder damage from the bad music, I guess.
Yeah, he goes nuts on that thing. I'm surprised. I actually was a little taken aback that Strahd does just show up and fight you at the end, because I thought like that would kind of distract or detract from his mystique, that he's just like throwing hands like a common brigand. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because if he gets reduced to 0 hit points, he just YOLOs into bats and goes home. So it doesn't matter.
That being said, you do have a way to not fight him, because if you are friendly to your tag along NPC and they're friendly with you, she'll say that, oh no, you're with her. Cause like Strahd sees the Inquisitor, he's like, yeah, you can go, get out of here, kid. But she's like, they're with me, you can roll deception. Strahd's like, oh really? Ah, shucks. Well, see you later, everyone. And they just zoop out. So you can skip an entire fight if you just succeed on a deception check at the end there, and engage with the NPC. So like, and that's fine. It does mean you get to skip a fight, but I do remember reading in the comments about the specific stat block for Strahd, Master of Death House, people saying, this is too weak. I'm gonna either up his HP or do something else to make this a bit more of a threat. But that is a common reprieve I've seen from people regarding some of the stat blocks for characters.
It's a tricky situation, because he's like an iconic villain. You want him to kick ass, but you're like not even like a third of the way into this big quest. And like if you're getting stomped out by these like mini bosses, it's kind of dispiriting or whatever. That's why I was surprised you actually can fight him, because like Lolth has a couple presences in the story, but you can't square up with Lolth. That's just that's silly. So yeah, this whole thing.
And as we noted before, this is like Strahd, but before Curse of Strahd campaign Strahd. So weird timey-wimey shenanigans.
Insofar as that matters, right? Once again, you're playing with people and you're like, the Strahd enters the room, and they're like, who? Like, it may not matter at all to them.
Or they're like, because I some people even said, hey, I want to actually start here after the Curse of Strahd campaign, and people are like, that doesn't make sense, because like you find one of the Rod of 7 parts randomly, and then how do you get the Vecna connection and stuff? So like, it'd be interesting, and one thing that would be hard to do but interesting would be if there was a way to on-ramp people into the campaign from other adventures in these different planes, you know what I mean, in these different settings, right? But that would been a pretty high bar to do design wise, so I don't blame anyone for not doing that. But if you're someone that's running a long form campaign that is already in one of these settings, you want to take on the challenge of finding a way to link that into Eve of Ruin. That's a fun challenge, I guess.
Just improving off the top of my head here, you're doing Curse of Strahd. You find in this version, it's the first piece of the Rod of 7 parts, and it pulls you to either Sigil or Neverwinter to get embroiled in it, and that's your path in there.
Yeah. But after you either beat up Strahd or lie to him, we then move on to our next chapter, which takes us over into the Dragonlance campaign setting in Krynn.
When I got here, I immediately thought, oh, this is why Skitch was negative. You have a legendary distaste for Kender, so I thought surely this is where.
My distaste for Kender comes explicitly for how they are written up and depicted in 3rd edition, when they're written as, you have to basically play them as people who steal from your party members and lie about it and such. And they kind of write it in a prescriptive manner. Not nearly as oppressively in the older editions or more current editions. It's specifically the third edition. But I'm also reminded of like other people describing their disdain of Kender for that reason. My understanding of how Kender are meant to be played in some scenarios is like, if you see a locked door, you are compelled to pick the lock. And because you have no sense of fear or property, you don't have any, you do things that are extremely dangerous, and you just feel that everyone's stuff is also yours and your stuff is also theirs. So you just put stuff in your pocket and then forget about it.
So for the audience who doesn't know what Kender or Kryn or Dragonlance are, do you want to give them a quick introduction? Because like we said, we've been jumping to famous locations throughout D&D's history, but these are like different realities. Like these are not on the same ostensible planet as Neverwinter.
Right. It'd be incorrect to refer to Kryn as like a different plane per se, even though it kind of treated as such. Kryn is the campaign setting, is the location for the Dragonlance campaign setting, which for a lot of folks, I think, especially through the 80s, was one of the more iconic D&D settings. In fact, it is so iconic, it had a long-standing influence on the Final Fantasy franchise. The reason for this is that Kryn has 3 moons, the red, white, and the red, white, and black moons, and you have 3 different types of spellcasters: the white, black, and red wizards or mages, the different robe, and that's where the white, black, and red wizards originated from in Final Fantasy 1. And that has been a consistent through point there. It is a direct invocation of Dragonlance, among other things.
Do people remember that Final Fantasy used to use spell slots? I feel like that is like lost to history. It's so funny to go back.
Like it's wild looking at Final Fantasy 1, and you could run Final Fantasy 1 as a Dungeons and Dragons campaign and it would work because spell slots are a thing and all this other stuff comes to play. Like the fact that the rogue character class in all Final Fantasy is always referred to as Thief is another sort of invocation of older D&D, where Thief is the actual like class and Rogue was what its later name became to be and stuff like that. So I find that just fascinating. That's my biggest interaction. Also, I know that there's like a Dragonlance animated movie that's a little cheap in production values, but it still has like Kiefer Sutherland as one of the voice actors in it, which is hilarious. We should watch that sometime, us. Yeah.
They're still in court over some of this shit, right? Like I feel like the creators of Dragonlance are constantly suing Wizards of the Coast.
I believe that has been at least resolved because there is the Dragonlance campaign setting books that are available now. Like things have been resolved enough, at least so that WotC can do this without like major legal recourse. But like I said, like the Dragonlance campaign book is a thing that exists and it brings back a lot of the stuff, and now we're back in Kryn again. I'm not super familiar with like the details of the setting itself. Like I said, most of my knowledge is from Final Fantasy more than anything else, which is
another iconic element I would say is the good were creatures, the good lycanthropes, which are featured here. That's one of the only things I know. Another element is that Dragonlance is significantly developed in a bunch of novels I've never read. So I will say that's a whole blind spot for me.
Yep. And another thing about this is that you're initially led to believe that the next rod, this is what the fifth piece of the Rod of 7 Parts, you believe it's inside of this large tree, the Palon tree. So like, big tree dungeon, let's go.
There's a couple of big trees. We talked about the Treant and the Spelljammer section, and then we're going to talk about another tree part later. This is the second of the tree trilogy. But yeah, the
trilogy, got it. Okay.
Yeah. I can't believe I walked into that one.
You missed it. Okay, you could have taken that from me, but no.
Yeah,
you can't do that to me.
I'm a stupid asshole. But yeah, you got to save these lycanthropes from a creature, and then you got to go through a dungeon, and then you got to do this fucking puzzle. I was like, my mind was rolling in its grave here, reading about reflecting the light onto a bunch of crystals. I was like, I would absolutely cut this part out.
Which puzzle is this specifically?
The red, white, and black
Yes.
moons and the mirrors and the stairwells. You gotta.
Oh, right.
Oh boy, it's annoying to read, let alone do. Maybe some people enjoyed this stuff, but this whole part did not spark joy.
I'm reminded of one of the boss fights from a Haunting Ground when I saw that fight in particular, because it's like a fight where you have to win the fight by reflecting moonlight into something or things like that. It's just like, yeah, it's a bit of thing, especially because that is like the final encounter. That's how you deal with the ritual effectively. Is you have your two ways of disrupting the ritual at the end of because this has two dungeons. You have the tree, and then you have the Three Moons Vault. And at the end of the Three Moons Vault is yet another ritual happening that you have to disrupt. And you can either do this by shining different moonlight onto different crystals, or you just remove a crystal from its pillar, which at least they give you like a more brute force solution to the puzzle. Fair.
I'm a hater. I found a lot of this kind of boring and annoying. I will say the iconic villain of Dragonlance, as far as I know, and he even makes it into like I think the base monster manual 5th edition, is Soth, the Death Knight, who is referenced frequently but does not actually appear. Am I missing? It's his minion Terimini Nightsedge is like the actual boss here, and not Soth. Maybe he's too strong for the characters at this point.
It's also kind of one of those things that's like, what I find weird is that the campaign's written in such a way that you could theoretically go back to these areas and do the actual campaign associated with it. But at the end of the campaign, your character is level 20. So if you're going to be doing that, it's probably not with these characters. It's probably going to be with, like, I don't know, their retainers or something. They just send them off to do these things.
Double check the appendix. Lord Soth is statted in the character dossiers in the back. So I will say, if you want to throw it down with him, but unless I missed it, it does not come up naturally in the adventure.
Let's see here.
You can fight like a double of him that comes out of this silvery orb. That definitely happens. But as far as his actual body,
because we're on D&D Hub, we could actually do Command Control F and just search to see if we could find there. But yeah, like there's 31 references to Soth in this chapter here, according to this. But I don't see like Soth making an appearance here.
Soth is also like the archetypical fallen paladin. This is like a character type. I mean, there might be some antecedent. Lancelot in the Arthurian myths is kind of similar, but like as far as Fire Emblem has a recurring Black Knight character that I would bet a pinky finger is inspired, but like in some way you could trace it back to Lord Soth, because I think these books are coming out in like the 80s or whatever.
Yeah, I'm looking here. Yeah. Like there's an interaction with a scrying sphere that it can result in a Death Knight fight if you don't respond to Soth with deference and such. But like, yeah, it does not make a direct appearance. But like you said, there's a lot of elements in here that is just like winks and nods and things that people kind of pick up on. I will say that you can that you also have a lunar dragon showing up in this fight too at the very end, which people are gung-ho about. That being said, if you click on the adult lunar dragon inside of this thing in D&D Beyond, it points you to a stat block from Spelljammer, because that's when I think they introduced the lunar dragons, was in the Spelljammer campaign setting for this stuff here. And but they at least have a copy of it in the appendix. So if you don't have that adventure on your Beyond account, they still have it in the appendix, thankfully.
It seems like an afterthought where it's like, okay, on your way out, there's a dragon here if you want to do some dragon stuff. But you can basically go at that point.
Yeah.
But maybe they also wanted to double up because the lady that you fight at the end here, Terimini, is not particularly fleshed out. But
no, and like you said, you you could just run away once the lunar dragon shows up because it cares more about Terramini than it does you. So like, and as we've noted, you gain level on milestones. So unless the party just wants to throw down, they could just leave. I can imagine like the image of the party walking away from the vault, and in the background, the lunar dragons doing their thing. You're like, that looks like it could have been fun to have done. Anyways, on to the next thing.
None of my business. The next part of the campaign is on the setting of Earth, spelled Oerth. So
this is Greyhawk. This is where we're going to next year, which I believe Greyhawk is the original campaign setting for D&D, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the oldest ones. I think I think it's like a Gygaxian / TSR in design, as opposed to like Dragonlance, which was like effectively a third party thing in the grand scheme of things.
Correct. The Dungeons and Dragons most people are familiar with takes place on Toril, Toril, aka the Forgotten Realms. So Greyhawk is a different thing, I guess. It's complicated and not really worth getting into. They're all Dungeons and Dragons now, but they're not like coterminous technically.
The way I like to think of it is like the oldest campaign setting of note was Greyhawk, then it became Dragonlance, and then Forgotten Realms became kind of the featured one, and it became the main default setting for a lot of stuff going forward. Even when 5th edition first came out, a lot of people kind of remarked about how the way that the gods and the Pantheon were described, it kind of implied that the Forgotten Realms was the default campaign setting, let alone reinforced by the fact that the Lost Mines of Phandelver takes place in the Forgotten Realms on the Sword Coast as a thing. So this is another one of those things here. Now, this is why I brought up the whole Tomb of Horrors thing in SRX, because we are going into the legally distinct Tomb of Wayward Souls, which is similar to, but not the same as, the Tomb of Horrors.
Yeah, in the same way you don't fight Soth in the Kryn section, you don't fight a Sararak in the Greyhawk section. You fight a minion who has similar but weaker powers because you would get completely annihilated by a Sararak proper.
Yep. Even though you're level 16 in this chapter here, you fight Rirak, which is just, I guess, a non-ace Sararak, I guess, you know.
This lich fucks.
Yeah, exactly. Like he is DTF. Now he but yeah, like it's this one here, what I like about this is that it is effectively well, first and foremost, you go to Earth, you just end up on this coast, and then you fight a Kraken. It starts off with a Kraken fight. And I like how it says here, the tentacles belong to a Kraken that took damage in an altercation with a hunting boat and has been reduced to 250 hit points. And it's like, okay, you're fighting a Kraken that has been reduced from, what is their normal hit point total here? 472 down to 250 so that the party can fight it better, I guess. Which is just like, okay.
This is a much needed like element of like excitement and over the topness, because a lot of this is a kind of pretty dry dungeon crawl, and also the world of Greyhawk doesn't have as strong of like gimmickry as like say Spelljammer or some of the other stuff.
Correct.
Like I would just describe Greyhawk as like what if medieval like Earth, you know, I mean, it literally is called Earth, Oerth, but like,
yeah, well, and you got to keep in mind, from my understanding, it's one of the original settings, so that would track, right? And
yeah, back then, the world building was like, what if the Middle East, but with the name changed? What if Asia, but with the names changed? Like, it was just very kind of it was very simple.
My whole thing is that once you get past the Kraken, you deal with like the NPCs in the area. You're given like a map that points to this tomb, and it even shows like if you get that, it shows the first gimmick of the tomb, which is why when I first was going through, I was like, is this a Tomb of Horror riff? Yes, it is, because just like the Tomb of Horrors, the first thing you have is 3 doors, 2 of which have traps, and what is the correct entrance? Like straight up Tomb of Horror shenanigans, but not as deadly, because unlike the original Tomb of Horrors, which was initially designed as a thing that's run at conventions where you're meant to throw like dozens of adventurers into to puzzle your way out through attrition, this is meant to be actually solved in the first encounter by the heroes. So
Yeah, in universe, this is like one of Acererak's like knockoff dungeons he built as like a joke.
it's Six Flags, right? This is like Six Flags Columbus, as opposed to Six Flags like Orlando or whatever they call it in like Los Angeles or something. Like, this is not the prestige one. This is the franchise location.
Yeah, I'm curious if this is just for balance, because the Tomb of Horrors is like too hard, obviously, for what they're going through here. Acererak is too powerful, so they just toned it down a little bit. Or are these like existing lore things they're calling back to? I actually don't know.
I tried to look around. When I looked up Tomb of Wayward Souls, I got pointed to a Screen Rant article that basically, I'm not going to accuse anyone of anything, but it basically is written at the article. Oh, let me pull up the article name here, because I was a little like caught off guard here. It says, where is it? Yes. The article, which came out a few days ago, Vecna Eve of Ruin fixes everything wrong with one classic D&D campaign, and it's specifically referencing Tomb of Horrors, and it says that this fixes everything wrong with it, when I'm just like, okay. Like, it says introduces more interesting elements. I'm like, first and foremost, like, you're referring to more interesting elements on a dungeon that is, decades and decades old, and is kind of old hat by this point anyway, so sure.
It fixes in the sense that like Nerf fixes football for children, I guess. It's like, I don't know that it's not good for what it was originally intended for.
Yeah. But like, at the very least, this is one of those things that would be fun for people who wanted to do like a fairly trap and puzzle heavy dungeon crawl, which is what the Tomb of Horrors is. But with a different type of design and goal in mind. And so you're going through and you have various traps and puzzles to deal with, and you can find some nice items and various little treasures along the way. And it all culminates in the final room in let's see here, in locale T26, and you run into Rirak, who is a false lich that some people noted. One of my funniest things I saw in the comments here was one of the commenters, Prince DJ 5678, says, "Why do I find it funny that this thing might be more powerful than a regular lich?" Which I think is a very funny detail to note out here. I also find it really funny because the art for the false lich makes it look like that they have a stand. I'm not sure if you noticed this. I'm going to drop this image in our little private chat here. Like, look at it, right?
Yeah, I do see that.
It's
Acererak standing behind Iraq, so it looks like there's
Rirak. Yeah, it's. But I also find it interesting how you don't actually have to fight Rirak. You can basically persuade him during the fight to say, hey, your creator does not regard you with any sort of, like, you basically, the main gimmick here is you can find out that Acererak has no regard for his like minion here, and you can convince him to sort of like cast off his chains and like rebuke it. And if so, I love this little detail here. After 3 successful checks, Rirak halts the battle and crushes his eye socket gems, which is pretty metal. That's pretty dope, honestly.
This whole thing is a fun take on a classic like dungeon crawl, because in theory, like gray corridors with like spike traps is not that exciting 50 years in. It's kind of a thing I try to avoid, but doing it where in character the boss is bored of it is like a fun lampshade hang. It's like, oh man, there's nothing to do in here, this sucks.
It also should be noted that of the 2 secrets for this chapter, the only way to get Rirak's secret is by persuading him out of the fight. If you defeat him normally, you don't learn about this secret, that he actually never wanted to do this job. And then he just gives you the keys, which honestly is like pretty cool. I love to imagine that afterward, he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to run this as a fun house for people,
Yeah, charge tourists for it. I mean, though
Exactly.
I rarely run like classic dungeons in this style in my campaigns. Like I said before, it's just like, why would someone build it? Like, why would you maintain it? How does the
What
ecosystem works?
What do you mean? I'm sure that you fell in love with the Vortex Bridge when you saw it.
I did not, but in the cases of Sararak, like it's kind of grandfathered in because it's classic, but also in universe, he is fucking with you. Like his whole thing is that he
Yeah.
created the dungeon to be a fucking miserable trap for greedy adventurers, so he could take your soul when you get mulched by his crushing walls and ceilings and stuff. So it kind of makes sense. It's more of that, just like the thoughtless copying of it for the decades and decades has rendered the concept kind of boring. If you needed to reference this material, I think this is a pretty fun way of doing it, including
Sure.
one little interlude here that caught my eye. You arrive at an expansive glade of trees. Bobbing lights flit between the branches, and at the center of the glade stands a towering banyan tree wrapped in sickly-looking vines. Did you have a Dice Funk exclamation point over your head when the banyan tree showed up?
I ended up skipping past that note because I was kind of entrenched by the other elements of the dungeon. So which landmark is that, if you don't mind me asking?
T9 is the banyan tree is a neutral treant named Abalahane. So there's the whole banyan interlude here that I thought was very funny because I'm always joking about wizards stealing from me. It's not actually that similar, but
No. But yeah, I mean, like, again, that's the third treant we run into in this overall arc, which is like cool, sure, no complaints there. I also think it's kind of funny because I can think back to my own Toy Witch like gimmick in Shardpoint, the idea of like a mimic that can make and recreate dungeons for the sake of like training people up. And I can imagine like a more nefarious one being an SRX stand-up that just sort of like makes traps for their own sort of like glee and stuff. But yeah, like overall, look at this. This seems like this could be fun to run on its own, independent from the campaign as a whole, right? You could take some of these chapters, remove the whole like rod of 7 parts, and just kind of run it as a standalone thing of a larger campaign. And it'd probably be fine. And I think that's another way to look at this overall thing. If you did not want to run the entire arc, you could just take one of the chapters and then just invoke it as its own standalone adventure as part of a larger campaign. It would work fine.
that's true. I think we might actually get through the 7 parts of the rod before the 2-hour mark. I'm excited about our restraint as we move to the final
we have
piece.
one more to deal with, and this is actually a really fun chapter, actually.
So we're going to hell.
Yes. So this is the Planescape arc of the Rod Collection, where you go to Avernus and you basically go into a casino.
When I first saw that, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because casino was a main thing in the Planescape book. There's like the whole
Right.
you start and end that adventure, I think, in a casino where you're being manipulated by a fox fiend or something. And it's not that like once they visit a casino, they can never do it again. It's it's fine to have like an idea return to. It's just, I believe, like less than a year or about a year between books. It's I don't know. I'm being annoying and nitpicking again, but there's got to be another thing to do.
Well, what's nice about this one here is that if you never ran the Avernus campaign, it does have the War Machine stuff there, like the ironies. Like you have this fucking sick art of this. What looks like it looks like just like this giant ass like 3-wheel motorcycle type thing that you're just going around on, and it's just like, yeah. Oh no, sorry. You're talking about the my mistake. The vehicle is the Venatrix. It's a pretty cool looking vehicle, and they even have a little sidebar about how to drive these things if you've never done the Descent into Avernus campaign, which is like, okay, cool. That's your first big thing you deal with.
I was gonna ask because I'm not that hooked into the community. Is there any backlash or like how do people feel about like Avernus, aka Hell, the lawful evil plane, being turned into kind of a Mad Max riff? Like all these cars, are people like? I wish this was more of like a traditional Christian Paradise Lost kind of thing.
I don't know. Like, I did not read too much into the discourse around Descent to Avernus, so I have no idea about like what the community response was. I remember some people talking about running the campaign and having some issues with it just from like running it DMing, but I did not see people lament about like problems with the setting itself. So I could not say.
I could imagine a play group who's like, "Oh, I thought D&D was like Game of Thrones," and then there's a motorcycle, and it's like, "Okay, that's not what I thought we were doing." I personally don't care. I think, cars covered in spikes. Like I literally just saw Furiosa yesterday, so this is 100% on brand for this. And yeah, the Legions of Hell are like metal, like in the musical sense. So this all tracks, but I just wonder if there's been a backlash to it because it seems like something people get annoyed by.
Well, after your first like Mad Max arc, you then end up at the centerpiece of this particular chapter, which is the Red Belvedere, which is the casino, and it introduces a character that from comments on D&D Beyond really endears themselves immediately, the champion of Tiamat, Windfall.
For a tiefling, just profoundly statted, like stronger than by an order of magnitude stronger than Strahd, which just seems weird. It's like not it's just a tiefling, which this reminds me of Baldur's Gate when there's all the things that should be like challenge rating 2 that are stronger than devils, you know. Cambions. The Cambions in Baldur's Gate are like way too strong for what they should be lore wise. Yeah, having a tiefling here ordering around pit fiends, very silly if you know their traditional portrayal.
Did you know you could actually beat those Cambions in the on the Nautilus? Granted, I had to cheese it by manipulating like proficiency bonuses and stuff. You get like basically an extra character level's worth of resources by beating them up, which is very funny. They actually accounted for that in the like loot and stuff you get from it. But yeah, the Red Belvedere is interesting because effectively you basically will run into Windfall, and Windfall is like your main thing. Your main person you're going to need to deal with eventually. They have the Rod of Seven Parts in their private sanctum adjacent to Tiamat's lair, and they will not tell you if they have it. I do like how it points out that a character succeeds on a DC 32 insight check, and even if you succeed at that, you don't know the truth. You just know that Windfall is hiding something. But yeah, 323 hit points, by the way. You know, just just astonishing hit points. More hit points than that Kraken you fought in the last chapter. Okay.
Yeah, just the buffest tiefling in history. So this is the second fully fleshed out casino I've seen in a recent D&D book, the Fortune's Wheel from that previous book, Adventures in the Multiverse. Pretty similar. There's different games you can play, but you're like trying to get to a greater goal, which is to get invited to the High Rollers room. I think that's pretty similar in that other adventure, right?
Yep. Yeah, what I like about this is the fact that your different casino rooms definitely have different shenanigans you can get up to. Like there's even a sidebar in here about cheating in the casino, which is hilarious. It says magical effects that enhance personal skills, such as bardic inspiration or enhance ability, don't directly tamper the games and aren't considered cheating. However, casting illusion will cause the pit fiends to come after you.
The pit bosses being pit fiends. I lolled. I did a IRL lol.
I also like the fact that you have like the physical methods of this deceit involve a DC 30 sleight of hand check. You know, cool. And then lastly, if someone is caught, a pit fiend can be placated with a minimum bribe of 250 talons or 2,500 gold.
There's multiple currencies here. It's a truly mobile game logic. You got the soul coins and the talents. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. I also like how, of the different casino rooms, the one I remember having a lot of fun was the, which one was it? I think it was the is it the Viridian? No, it's not the Viridian Den. I think it's the.
I liked fixing the horse race. That's funny.
The horse race is funny. I like the Cerulean Hall, I believe is what it is. Yes, that's when we're dealing with Nissa. Because Nissa's whole thing is that you're playing dragon chess effectively. And you have two ways of dealing with the situation here. One, Nissa has like a plus 12 modifier when playing dragon chess. And they're also using a medallion of thoughts to read your thoughts and kind of cheat against you. So you can either beat Nissa or basically cast detect magic to realize that the medallion is how they're cheating. You can just say, hey, you're cheating because you're medallion. She's like, I concede. So like that's a she won't play a legit match of dragon chess against you. She will just cheat or just, and such.
It's been many years since we did a casino in Dice Funk. It was season 4, I think, was the time, and it was only like
correct
a 1 episode max. And I think basically you all caused some kind of stampede by sabotaging one of the slot machines. I think is how that worked out. You ran into the back and basically got caught, which is fine. That little interlude was fine. But I assume if we ever do something like that again, if we come back to a casino, it will be more involved, like a longer thing, because I do like the high stakes, the greed, the different characters you can have. It's a fun thing. The problem is just that it's hard to conceive of a way to beat all these high level spellcasters and all of their different ways of tracking you. Like in real life, I don't know if I was literally Googling this earlier. Casinos are just so hard to rob. They have so many redundancies. There's so many security features. I was like trying to find the most successful casino heists, and like, unless some of them are being kept secret, which is definitely true because you don't want to publicize your failures. But it seems like everyone gets caught eventually. It's not an easy thing or a very likely thing to do.
So basically, the only thing I kind of feel a little sad about is the fact that you have these different casino rooms at different stakes, but you only need to succeed at one of them to move on to the next chapter. So you have the racetrack, which you basically can rig or otherwise. You have the Cerulean Hall, which is the dragon chess with the cheater. You have the Scarlet Coliseum, where you have the pit, where you basically, I believe, you're just
fighting.
Fighting. Yeah. Then you have the Stygian Maze, which is a maze with his own little like skill challenge and like even like little treasure chambers and such. And then you have the Viridian Den, which is basically an auction, I believe is what it is.
Yeah, it's like a game with an auction element. It makes sense though because like they do tell you how to play the games. It's like, oh, you roll this and then you roll that. But I can also see a table of people who are like, I don't really want to do that. Like I want to play a game where I roll combat, and you could just do that. You could just treat the casino as a place where you do fights if that's how your players want to do it.
Right. On the one hand, if you want to engage in all the games, could you? Sure. I mean, because you technically can get more rewards by doing more games. But if you just want to like beat someone up and then move on, just go to the Coliseum, done,
You're such a high level character at this point. I don't know how much money is going to mean to you. I guess it depends on the economy of your own game, but
depends how many people want to bribe. That's what you do that money for.
In the next section, there's a part where you find like a sculpture worth like 250,000 gold pieces. It's like, all right, now we're just doing Monopoly money. None of this matters anymore. Last thing I'll say before we move on, I noticed that there's a Rakshasa in this section, and it is still a cat. Is Dungeons & Dragons not moving away from that?
I think that's partially just because, if I'm not mistaken, that depiction, if I'm not mistaken, you're talking about Uvashar. I think that art for Uvashar might be a carryover from something else, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I think maybe eventually they're going to move away from it. But I think Rakshasas and all the other depictions in 5th edition tend to have like that type of form. I know, for example, the one in Dragon Heist, there's a Rakshasa in there who also is like some sort of cat creature in their presentation to others. So I'm not too like thrown off by that. I do like how that the pit masters, they have a nice simple sidebar for who each of these people are, what their attitudes are, and how to gain their favor. So that's a nice quick summation about how you might run the casino and how the party might go through it there. Because they basically, each of these pit masters is responsible for each of the rooms. So it gives you a nice sort of way to sort of case things out. And yeah, it's
For context for my weird comment, so in Hinduism, there are these demonic creatures called Rakshasa. They're essentially humanoid. They look like people. They may have multiple arms or multiple heads, but they're like human-ish. But in 1974, there was a TV show called Kolchak the Night Stalker, which had an episode where there were shapeshifters they called Rakshasa that were eating people. And Gary Gygax saw that, and he put Rakshasa into Dungeons and Dragons and made them anthropomorphic cats because of that episode of that TV show. And so for 50 years, they have been cats. Until recently, it was announced that another Wizards of the Coast property, Magic the Gathering, would change that. So they were cats on the plane of Tarkir, which is based on like South and East Asia, I believe. Central Asia. But they're making them more accurate. They're like printing new versions of the Rakshasa cards that make them not look like cats, because that's just a weird thing to do to an existing religion. And I thought maybe that would carry over to D&D. So I guess I was just surprised that that's the case.
It might be one of those cases where it's a mixture of like, because of the callback nature of things that they wanted to keep in that form. I can't say for certain. I don't want to impose either way. I would not be surprised that future Rakshasas kind of conform to the Magic the Gathering approach, where they're not going to be exclusively that form. This is always kind of a contentious thing about Dungeons and Dragons, just like Shin Megami Tensei. It's just like it's co-opting so many different religious beliefs and systems, and and that can always lead to problems with certain depictions.
Yeah, I think most mythologies are pretty much fair game. I personally wouldn't put Muhammad in Dice Funk. But like I have referenced Jesus and stuff. For me, everyone's line is different. Everyone has to look inside their heart. I feel like I have spent enough of my life dedicated to thinking about and reading about Christianity that I'm comfortable playing in some of that space. I'm not an expert in Hinduism, so I only would lightly touch that. But I don't know if how many people are like mad. It's just a peculiarity of the way this is done. But yeah, I've definitely seen different responses to the change in magic. Anyway, this is a cul-de-sac. The last piece of the rod is making a big dragon.
Yes, exactly. We basically go into once you basically gain the favor of one of the pit masters, you go into Dragon's Pride, which has like the cantina, has a little it has some the place called you have a little store, the Enchanting Arcana area. You have Virtuous Vices, which is a spa. Then you have Windfall's office, and then and on top of things there, one of the items you have in there, by the way, is the Tome of Leadership and Influence, which is one of those dangerous items to put someone into someone's inventory. You're familiar with items like the Tome of Leadership and Influence?
Not off the top of my head, no. Tell me about this.
So it is one of a set of books that if you read it, you get not only a plus two, a 2-point increase to a particular score, in this case charisma, but also increases your maximum. So it's one of the ways to actually increase your maximum for a stat beyond 20 there. But, this is for a high-level campaign, which is fine. But yeah, it ends up in what's called the Ruby Sanctum, and this is where you have your confrontation with Windfall. And this is particularly, I find this particularly funny. So you fight Windfall. If you reduce them to 0 hit points, Tiamat interjects, heals up Windfall, and then admonishes everyone. It's like, what do you do? Like, why are you interrupting me, you fuckos? And really funnily about this whole thing is that if the party informs Tiamat about Vecna's plot, Tiamat's just like, ugh, fine, take the rod.
This is what I was saying about Loth earlier, because Tiamat has nothing to gain by Vecna rewriting reality. That's
right.
Obviously something that should be stopped. I'm just curious why Loth doesn't realize that, but yeah.
Tiamat being evil, but at the same time being listen, I partially made the material plane. I don't want some fuck boy rewriting it. Go, get out of here. But if you don't tell Tiamat about Vecna's plot, then you have to fight Windfall again.
So one of the final cameos from a classic villain, the five-headed dragon god. You just have this little conversation with her. Once again, can't fight her. Would be foolish to fight her, but she pokes her heads in.
In terms of foolishness, also, you could actually go down a tunnel towards Tiamat Lair. If you do that, you have to face an ancient red dragon, and like, unless the parent characters provide a compelling reason to enter, the 546 hit pointed ancient red dragon attacks the characters. So like if you have someone who's just like a real big, like, I want to fight Tiamat, are you sure? You have to fight basically Windfall twice, and then this ancient red dragon, and then you can fight Tiamat. So I don't know. That seems like a foolish thing to do.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping a character from saying, like, can I roll athletics to kick the moon? I guess. It doesn't seem good use for time.
But just in time after the 2-hour mark just rolled by,
we didn't make it.
We got all the rods of 7 parts. We returned, and once again, a little bit of railroading happens, because basically, you're like, Mordecai's like, you're level 18 heroes. You must rest up a little bit. That's all been really tiring. Here, give me the rod for now.
Give me the rod for normal reasons. I would like the rod regular style.
Yeah, because here's one of the things that's a little silly is that basically you have the rod of 7 parts. It actually automatically assembles itself when it's close together. It says that notably, and a player could attune to it, but you are told to instruct people to return back to Sigil as quickly as possible. And then
Yeah, this whole thing kind of relies on the players falling for some tricks, which in my experience, they never fall for the ones you think they will. I don't know how this would, this is completely chaos-based. You kind of just have to roll with however this goes. It seems like a nightmare.
Yeah. I like this line here. This is something that, like, I don't know if you'd ever reveal this to the players here. Cass knows Vecna is conducting his ritual remaking on the plane of Pandemonium. After receiving a message in a dream from the Dark Powers, Cass realizes that the magic inherent to his Crown of Lies would transport him through Illustrial's portal to roughly the location of Vecna's ritual. So that's why he just takes the rod and fucks off, because like, my crown that you've never seen before actually gets me straight to Vecna, so I don't need you all anymore.
There's a lot of yada, yada, yada in this part. It's very convenient that his homie that he needs to break out of jail is next door to Vecna. That's just a complete coincidence. There's no like lore explanation for why that is the case, but the rest of the adventure takes place in Pandemonium because that's just where everyone is. Maybe that's just a correct thing about these characters, which is fine, but it's very like convenient.
Well, it makes sense for Pandemonium for Miska, because that's, chaos place. That's, you talk about taking the Rod of Order. Its creation was there to lock Miska there. Sure, that's fine. Vecna also being there. Okay, But yeah, basically there's multiple like routes this can go, but ultimately it leads to either Cass like running off with the rod, or you fighting Cass and things being revealed. And then you're basically chasing Cass to stop him from freeing Miska and such. Because on the one hand, sure, having Cass and Miska fight Vecna would help, but Cass wants to do his own remaking. That's the whole point. So sure.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think, like, what would I say if my players were like, no, Cass, join us. We'd be stronger together. I'd be like, that is pretty hard logic to argue with. It would be easier to beat Vecna's ass if you work together. Like, why are you even, like, I know he's an evil vampire, but like, why are you not working together right now? It's just kind of like, oh, because he's evil. This is a world where evil is like a specific, defined thing. And you just have to roll with that. I also like how Tasha and Illustrial get knocked down like extras in a kung fu movie where they get kicked once and then they roll around in the ground in the background of the scene for however long it takes. Oh, I'm so injured.
This also feels like one of the shorter chapters overall, right? Because basically you return the rod with the rod. Cass reveals himself or otherwise moves along, and then you basically have to end up in Pandesmos, the Pandesmos Outlook, and arrive at Carapace Ridge. And once you arrive there, you're now level 19. This is like one of the shortest chapters in the entire book, it feels like.
There can be a little bit of a side quest if the players don't immediately go to sleep as they're instructed to. Basically, you have to go find Illustriel's wife. It's just like, if the players are being stubborn about letting themselves be tricked. But yeah, it's pretty simple. The villain reveals himself and escapes. Like I said about Vecna at the beginning, you kind of have to do some legwork to make the villains have like texture, because as written, you don't know Cass is Cass for the entire time, and then when you do, he escapes immediately. So it's not like you have a lot of banter with this guy. If you're not familiar with the character, he's a rando. So I think it's pretty hard to make him a compelling villain with how little screen time he gets.
It also is noted that Cass does not have his iconic sword of Cass, and one of the player characters could have it, which would be very funny for a character to have that and be like, huh, I wonder if this sword has anything to do with that guy who calls himself Cass. Okay. I'll also point out that Cass is one of 2 characters that you're explicitly told to use the Chime of Exile on to resolve the fights.
Yeah, I forgot about that for long sections because you get it at the beginning. I wonder if what happens if you try to like use it on, Strahd or whatever. Probably nothing, right?
Correct. I don't think they would do much. I think the whole point is that you could take it early on, but Chapter 9 is when you're explicitly given it by Azrael to basically, to be like, here, use this. This will help, kind of territory.
Yeah. Like I said, though, they're too injured from the sneak attack to join you, also because they're uber powerful and would do a lot of the work for you. This is a constant thing on Dice Funk where I want to have beloved NPCs, but I don't want them to solve every problem, so I have to contrive them being elsewhere. So the party goes to Pandemonium, the place of pure chaos, and then they fight for what seems like 8 sessions.
Yeah, this is Chapter 10 is a pretty big thing here because you have the Carapace Ridge, you have you run across a mage named Vave, and it's interesting. We have like a big named NPC who does not have a secret, because Vave does not have a secret in Chapter 10. You have 2 other characters with secrets, one of them being Cass.
The Vave and Noxa are siblings, and one of them has a secret. So I think of them as kind of a unit.
Fair enough. Yeah. You have like the Ruinous Sea, Hurricane Tower, which is a set piece. Then you have the Ruinous Citadel as the next like set piece there, and that's where Miska's prison hall is. And so you have that whole thing. And if you want to fight Miska, like Miska does have a stat blocks. And let me double check here real quick. There are some comments in there.
So this whole thing is there's a big war in the chaos plane between the forces of Lolth, the spider goddess, and Miska, the wolf spider. So it's kind of I don't know how intentional this is because these are existing characters, but there's the wolf spider and the spider woman are the 2 sides. I don't know why they're fighting, like I said, not to go back to this, but Lolth is for some reason siding with Vecna, and it's this huge battlefield that you are told you can't influence. Like you can do some stuff, like you can drop a tower on some people, but it's like a background to you sneaking around and talking to people and stuff. There's just this huge war going on. This section is very long, and there's a lot of difficult fights. In fact, the book is like, hey, your people probably can't like fight Miska the wolf spider, but if you want to, I guess here's some numbers for you.
I like one of the things I'll even note here. In Y7, Miska is still trapped in his prison, but the opening is sufficient for him to affect the fight. He can't move, can't be harmed, and can only use his legendary actions, which originate from the opening there. So, like, if the characters return, then later on, if the characters return to Sigil without sealing Miska back in his prison, the Demon Lord emerges and is free to wreak havoc across the multiverse. Just like, okay, they can encounter him if they return to Pandesmos, or you might decide Miska is present somewhere else in this adventure when there's only one more chapter left. Uh,
Yeah, that's
so
post game
like,
content. If you want to hunt down this challenge rating 24 freak, it's like basically a big drider with two wolf heads in addition to the body part. Does that make any sense? He's a fucking giant Spider Man.
yeah. It also is interesting because there's actually two different. I think there's two different stat blocks for Miska.
Yeah, there's the fighting him when he's just like poking his head out of a little portal, which is kind of a funny image. Like literally the whole adventure is assembling this rod to break this dude out of prison, which I mentioned at the beginning. It's kind of silly from the player's perspective, like how much trouble they went through just to bust one guy out of jail. But then there's the other version, yeah, when he gets out and you can fight him for real.
Yep. And then, but on all this, if you grab the rod of 7 parts, Miska gets sealed away. Oops. Load-bearing plot item in that respect. But then again, that is what the lore for the rod of 7 parts are. And then you go to the last area, the cliffside, where you end up fighting Cass. It's like the capstone, for the end piece for this, like you said, very long chapter to contrast the fairly short chapter 9. And your characters are level 19 for this whole thing here.
It's also very funny that Cass leaves his homie hanging. Like after going through all this trouble to break the wolf spider out of prison, he sticks the rod in the hole. I think it's described as like, you know, a very small hole he makes in it, and then he leaves the room so that you don't have to fight them both at the same time. I if it were me, I would not have left the room. Seems like an important thing to protect.
Yeah, it's like, well, my job's done here. I also like this.
It's described as that Miska's like trying to widen the hole physically with his hands, and it's taking so long. He's just not making any progress. Kind of embarrassing.
When you run up to Cass and fight him, I love this little detail here because it's so hammy. Cass spares only a few moments to belittle the characters before he draws his sword and attacks. Throughout the battle, he taunts them for being Mordenkainen's good little puppets. I'm just like, come on, man. We're level 19, you know? And then also, if the characters had trouble recovering any part, Cass mocks them for their specific failures, saying they can't even dance on puppet strings properly. Very silly stuff there, but, you know, fine.
Yep, so this is like kind of a climactic boss with the guy who's been fucking with you all campaign. It's interesting because that book is called Vecna, Eve of Ruin, but you know this guy gets way more screen time, even though he's in disguise. And also, Vecna's still not aware of you at all, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. This is I not to disparage this at all, but there is sort of like a Rise of Skywalker-esque, like, you know, Vecna returns in the opening text crawl.
Yeah. For being named after him, Vecna is not particularly present or dynamic, unless, like I said, unless you're like constantly inflicting like psychic visions on your players due to their connection, which I would do. So you can use the chimes to send Cass home, and God fucking Lord, before we get 3 hours long, how does this thing end? Skitch, free me from my prison.
Are you talking about the next chapter, or are you talking about this chapter here?
The next chapter, unless you have anything more on this one, because they're still in Pandemonium. Both final chapters are in the same kind of
What I like to
place.
note here is getting Cass a secret. There's sort of like two main ways you get it. If you use the Chime of Exile, you just get his secret in your brain automatically. I don't know why, but like it basically just says as Cass is pulled back to Tovag, the character's linked to Vecna flares, and that causes the last secret to be pulled. Or if the character's on the verge of killing Cass, the vampire tells the character's Vecna's location in an attempt to save his life, and they can just kill him. Sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah,
I feel bad for Cass. He did all this stuff. He did so much work to try to stop this guy from unmaking reality. Kind of heroic in a way.
Except he was going to do it naked for his own purposes, I believe. So, you know.
Oh, come on. Judgmental.
Yeah, but then we go to chapter 11, Eve of Ruin, and now you're...
That's Chappie.
Now at this point, your characters are level 20. I'll just point out before we get too deep into this chapter, one of the biggest complaints I think people have had in the comments of the article of the whole thing here, and that is the stat line for Vecna the Archlich, where people have said basically that he does not appear to be as powerful as he should be for this. But there is an explanation for it. We'll get there, and I'll point out some other details as we get there. But yes, you now know where Vecna is, and now you need to go into a place called Vecna's Grasp, which is a cave network where you must dismantle different demiplanar unrealities. So basically you see glimmers of Vecna's plans to reshape the multiverse, and you have to disrupt them before confronting Vecna properly, I guess.
Do you think it was called Vecna's Grasp before he got there? Is it like nominative determinism?
Yeah.
It's like someone named
Absolutely.
like Tanner, who went on to work with Furs.
Yeah, exactly. Like, like Vecna really is just like, it's just one of those classic. You have Smith, you have Miller and Vecna are just common family names. Vecna, just goes by his last name, and that's how it goes, right?
We don't need to belabor this part very much. It reminds me very much of like a JRPG where it's like, all right, time to fight God, but first 3 hours in this fuck ass dungeon. They're trying to make it epic. They really stretch it out. The unrealities you go to are okay. One is showing an alternate Neverwinter. One is showing an alternate Cass Torment. And then there's one focused on the Astral Sea. If I were playing this, I would probably give the players a personalized alternate, like nightmares for them to enjoy.
Right. That would honestly be like that's fair. I think that the options they have are fine just because they kind of tie. You have Cass, who you just beat the shit out of getting tormented. We're just like, okay, fine. You got that. You have Neverwinter because that's kind of where the campaign officially begins. And then the Sea of Gods kind of shows this idea of like, okay, all the gods are going to be killed off and spread around the Astral Sea, which you are kind of told about during that chapter, but like the other locales are not referenced really, and fair enough. But if you're doing this with a party of 4 or 5, extending this chapter out by having each unreality tied to a specific character would be a nice touch for sure.
I also love seeing an Astral Dreadnought, an iconic but still somehow not mainstream creature, which is the inspiration for the Kako Demon from Doom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if people know that, but you get to see one of those guys. But you're kind of just expending resources on your way to the Vecna fight. Vecna, it was mentioned relatively early. I guess this information wouldn't be for the players, but as the DM, you know that Vecna has been doing this ritual, collecting secrets from the multiverse to do his thing, and that leaves him distracted and weakened. I think it even mentions like Cass doesn't know at this point, and no, I guess only you as the DM know that he is not God Vecna at this point.
Right, and this is why this is the explanation for why Vecna is at a state where you can actually fight him and defeat him, because he is depowered. But this has caused some umbrage from some commenters on D&D Beyond, because they're like, because to give you an example, he does not have legendary actions, and he has 5 legendary resistances, but he has no mythic actions, no legendary actions, and no lair actions. That's as far as I could tell off the top of my head. When I see this.
But yeah, it's at the end of a hard dungeon crawl, and it makes narrative sense and stuff. If he was like truly as powerful as he is in some incarnations, it wouldn't like be possible. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, like it's hard to say. Basically, the big gimmick about all this is once you get past the 3 unrealities, you end up in the cave of shattered reflection, and this is sort of the payoff for the secrets mechanic here. Because if your characters are like me and just hoard all the elixirs because you don't want to use them too frivolously, the more secrets you have, the more bonuses you have going into the final encounter with Vecna. You can have up to 17 secrets kept, which, by the way, I'm going to note, in one of the earlier chapters, I forget which one it is now, you can share a secret in order to appease somebody, but I forget who it is. But outside of that, I don't think there's many other plot environments where you're compelling players to spend secrets to gain an advantage on something. That might be the case. this is a decently long book, and I am bad at remembering details. So don't yell at me, internet.
I mean, we were doing really well. It's been 2.5 hours of us regurgitating details, so you can tell we read the book.
Yeah, but
anybody's out there is like accusing you of not knowing what's happening.
It would have been kind of interesting that if you kept too few secrets, like you actually had a penalty applied against you. But I guess, for some people, not getting a buff is the same as a nerf. So, fair enough.
Yeah. So you fight Vecna. Like I said, he has very little face time. He doesn't have any like scripted dialogue. He is just kind of like an evil guy of evil, trying to destroy the world because he's evil. I don't know if you want to, take umbrage with that because it is just an existing character, but there's not a lot of nuance here.
Yep.
You kick his ass.
And the big thing, the only thing I will say is a little bit of umbrage is the way that this thing's written. It says to achieve victory, you must reduce Vecna to 50 hit points or fewer, and then use the Chime of Exile, which is something you're kind of told early on, of course. But it's just like, okay. It's also funny that if somebody can smack Vecna with the Rod of 7 Parts, he takes an extra 10d6 damage from it, which is, I like the idea of like you get this thing, this super powerful rod, you just give it somebody, they just smack people with it, don't use any of the spells on it. That's a very good mental image. If you're running this,
it is funny that you have to send him to Earth. Because Vecna is not a Forgotten Realms character. I know that nobody really cares that much, but this huge, big celebration and stuff is about a character from a setting that they don't really care that much about anymore.
Like, send it back to Greyhawk, that thing you were at, a place you're at a few chapters ago. But yeah, it's just like, it basically... It can feel a little anticlimactic. I think some people noted how they wanted like power up Vecna a bit differently to make the fight a little bit bigger, especially because some people even specifically invoke Critical Role because effectively, from my understanding, I think you kind of noted this, Vecna was sort of like the final boss of campaign 1 for Critical Role. So like this, I wouldn't say necessarily invokes that, but I think some people might have that sense in their head with Vecna being the final boss of being like, this is their own Critical Role type kind of campaign. So honestly, I'd say have some fun throwing weird gimmicks in this fight to make it a little bit more dramatic in some way. Make it a big set piece. Because then, and of course, as usual, you can't kill Vecna. Even if you drop him to 0 hit points, he comes back. You know about that detail in his stat block, right, Austin?
I mean, the conclusion, which, like you said, anticlimactically, like with the fight, ends the story like immediately. It says, Vecna is far from undone. He may stubbornly attempt to destroy and recreate the multiverse again, or formulate a new scheme to bend the cosmos to his will. Like, there is no even semblance that you've beat him. It's just immediately like back at it again with the Krispy Kreme.
Yeah. Oh, well, like, and if you want to do that, if you take Vecna to 0, in his stat block, as usual, it says, if Vecna is slain, he lives on as his disembodied spirit because he refuses to accept his fate, and his spirit fashions itself a new body after 1d100 years. So, like, Vecna is designed as a character that you cannot actually capital K kill, but, like, your character's a level 20, and, and the whole implication here even says at the very end, it'll be sometime before a new band of adventurers must arise to defeat the Archlich once again, which makes me re-invoke my thought of, like, if you did this campaign, you could almost do this and then do other campaigns with your retainers. Are you familiar with this idea about how in very earlier D&Ds, the common goal was that once you reach max level, your character would retire, and then one of their underlings would become your new characters you play as. That's sort of like a pretty typical concept with strongholds and stuff, which is actually why like Matt Colville made his whole like extra supplement about strongholds for 5th edition, because that was meant to be a reference to older D&D in some ways, where strongholds were a big focal point for how you ran campaigns and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was like a bunch of ink spilled about like running your like, fiefdom or whatever,
yes,
and having like economics and stuff going on.
For sure.
Because it was, more of a trying to like live in this medieval world rather than doing only the highest octane genre,
now,
fiction.
I don't want to like begrudge the designers too much about the final fight feeling anticlimactic, because I think it's kind of one of those things that's a problem with doing like level 20 stuff. Is like, okay, how do you make a level end game encounter interesting when you're just dealing with super powerful characters in the first place? If you want to, I have a little thing I can actually pull up real quick here. Give me just a moment. I'm going to pull up the highest level enemies you could find in 4th edition. Let's see here if I can pull up this here. Here, like, like Bahamut, which is a level 36 character in 4th edition. And even here, like, it's not, it has a bunch of powers and abilities, which is kind of cool, but like, you know, it's, you basically with a lot of hit points and some abilities and stuff. And it's not going to be like super, it's hard to make something particularly interesting outside of like doing things with the lair or doing some other gimmicks. Actually, I'm reminded of, speaking of Tomb of Horrors, there was basically a DM's Guild Adventurers League version of Tomb of Horrors, and it's the funniest shit, because if you're running that little adventure for a bunch of people who know the Tomb of Horrors and know how to avoid all the traps, they get to Esrarak, and what he does in each round of the fight is teleport people into a room where there's a trap and triggers a trap automatically during the fight against him. Hilarious stuff. So for me, if I was doing this encounter with Vecna, what I'd probably do is reinvoke the unrealities. Like each round, you're shifted into a different unreality with a different thing going on, invoking back to the older chapters, and kind of like, and as you're invoking these older chapters, seeing these different things that Vecna is trying to impose as you're fighting him, right?
It's pretty hard to balance it. I imagine that, adding too much might make it too hard, too quickly, but I haven't run it, so it's hard to say. I'm just completely guessing.
For sure. And this is one of those things where this is more about the theatrics of the fight, right? If you're doing this all just in this sort of like cave of shadow reflection, like you have these mazes and stuff going on. One of the main gimmicks of it is this idea of like you have these walls that obscure things, and if you have enough secrets you can see clearly through them, it's kind of like, pierces some of the illusions going on. But I like the idea of like a big capstone fight, especially for this multiplanar jaunting thing, to have multiplanar jaunting during the encounter itself. I think that'd be a way you can kind of up things without making it too much harder, just adding some extra little quirks that change up each round, which could be kind of fun.
Whew. So that's the end, huh? We beat his ass.
That's the end. You beat his ass. You're told you're big damn heroes. Tasha and Illustrial like begin planning a celebration. You return. Zelda, says you did not save the world, and the king / Illustrial and Tasha say you're gonna make a great feast, and everyone laughs. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of like Faces of Evil here. My mistake. To Vecna, Faces of Evil.
There really is no like denouement. It really have to be stressed that it just slams to a close immediately.
Yep. And like, this is kind of like, I actually reminded back in very early edition, ever familiar with the Immortals books, by the way? Like, first edition?
No.
So the Immortals books was like basically a set of books for basically, what do you do when your characters are level, like max level and are effectively gods? Oh, here's some adventures for when your characters are effectively gods, and have them continue doing adventures. That's a design space that has been rarely if ever treaded upon, and never really in 5th edition, because campaigns really are never designed to go this far, and for various reasons. So, yeah, I mean, what else you want to say on the way out of here? Any things you want to tease or talk about before we close this multi-hour adventure here?
It's always this long. I'm sorry, audience. Yeah, before we get to 3 hours, just the appendixes real quick.
Yes.
The bestiary, pretty slim pickings. Most of these are printed in other books. Does anything jump out at you? Because it's like It's disappointing. I don't want to be mean. It's just like I come to these books often to try to get new art of weird little creatures, and this one didn't really do it for me.
I mean, part of I think it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's by necessity, but part of the design of the appendix is a thing of necessity, because if you don't already have the books that these stats originally come from, then you need these in order to even run the campaign at all. So like, it's kind of there as a necessity placeholder there. Like, at the very least, it's not like buy this book to know what this stat block is. See ya. But I find it interesting because I believe the next chapter is when we get into stat blocks for characters that you typically aren't even fighting. They're just there to kind of describe stuff. I'm just double checking to see if there's any interesting stat blocks that are unique to here. Like,
I do like the dossiers because the way the campaign is written, it doesn't say like, oh, this character has an Irish accent and they make a lot of jokes. Like, it just is like, this is a ghost. She tells you this, you know? So I do like that you get a little bit more. It's only the major characters, but you get a little bit more backstory and stuff. That's helpful. I don't remember seeing this in all the other campaign books. But yeah, you also get a big stat blocks for people that you don't fight, like Lustriel. I guess you could fight her. I don't know what. Who knows what your characters are going to do.
Yeah, also I'll point out that Cass's stat block is hilariously cracked. Strength 26, Dex 20, Con 22, Int 14, Charisma 26, Wisdom 19. So, you know, he has at least one flaw, you know.
If he and his homie would have hooked up, they would have completely twisted Vecna's whole shit.
Oh, yeah.
They're both basically his challenge rating. So together, I mean, that's just a stomping.
Yeah.
That's not even fair.
Let me double check here. Like, interesting, Lord Soth's stat block is from the Dragonlance book, it seems. So that's where that whole thing comes from, which is fine. Miska's stat block is from this book here. And then the stat block for Strahd is from this one here because this is specific to it here. I like how they have a stat block for Tasha in here for some reason. Just like, okay, are you know, like it's cool to see, but are you going to fight her? I don't know.
Maybe you just want to see what all that hideous laughter is about.
Yeah. And then, yeah, there's Vecna at the very end there. Yeah, so the dossier section, I mean, it's nice to have a dossier section. And then the last chapter is just the secrets tracker. So, like, this shows you all the secrets that are available in here. There's even a downloadable PDF that I think is an activity sheet for you to have. It even has a little my favorite detail about it here. At the very bottom of the PDF of the secrets tracker, it has total secrets learned minus secrets revealed. It gives you the math formula. It gives you the algebra formula for how many secrets the players have kept until the end there. Which, you know, fine.
Single digit math, the bane of every Dungeons and Dragons character.
So overall, though, like I said, this is something that's a big lift. There are, you know, I don't begrudge anyone who's engaging in the design here because this is just a lot of stuff to do. You have, you know, a few things here. I think that a lot of the individual chapters are strong enough that if you wanted to just not run this adventure proper, but yoink out individual chapters to insert into your own campaigns, completely fine. Or you could use these individual chapters as like like you could theoretically, use the Death House in here as an introduction to the rest of Curse of Strahd, and then move on from there. The pacing would be a little weird, obviously, but there's some things you could do with that for sure.
It's definitely one of the weaker books we've talked about. But like we said, the greatest hits kind of nature of it leaves it feeling like a kind of disconnected series of MacGuffin fetch quests, because that is what it is.
Yes. Because that is what the original adventure for the Rod of Seven Pieces was. So like that is kind of a fault of this type of campaign, but as a callback to the original version of this sort of stuff, you can forgive it for that for sure. If we were to do a tier list and drag this podcast even farther, we're not going to do top tier chapters. You know, the Eberron one I think is really top. My favorites are the Eberron one and the Tomb of Wayward Souls are like two of my favorites, and I think the Casino's like a little bit underneath that, but what were some of your standouts for this?
I agree that the Eberron one is probably the best. I liked it a lot. I mean, I think probably in a vacuum, the Tomb of Wayward Souls is my least favorite, but that's just because of I just don't really fuck with traps or puzzles that much. We didn't even talk about the one that I think I laughed out loud, where it's like 3 casks of enchanted liquor.
No. It's not 3 casks. It's more than that. Okay.
Oh Christ, 7. It's 7 fucking casks.
It's 7 casks. Okay. It's called the Cave of 7 Casks, and there's a whole message in Celestial, and each cask has a different benefit and such in there. So like, yeah, that is classic Tomb of Horror send up shit, which I find funny, which is why I like it. But I understand your problem with it there.
It says, if the characters have trouble solving the puzzle, any character who walks across the floorboards realizes the only way to make it past this room is through the thin gaps between the floorboards. If the characters still struggle, there's like not only 1 but 2 dumbass modes here. Allow them to make a Arcana check to determine the magical liquor in one of the casks may facilitate travel through the cracks between the floorboards.
This reminds me when I was running the Tomb of Horrors 4th edition thing at MagFest one year. You basically have this whole thing leading up to this fake lair of Asarak. You go in there and it's like sitting on a golden throne and shit. And the whole point is that you're supposed to pass basically a perception check to notice a secret wall. And if you don't notice it, the rest of the dungeon just is not accessible and the adventure is over. Which is just like Tomb of Wayward Souls at least does not engage with that tomfoolery, but there's still some of it.
Sure. There's different styles, different play groups will enjoy it. Like I said at the beginning, I think if you're playing with people who get the references, they'll have a lot more fun. If you play with newbies or people who are not that vested, it'll be a series of randos that they have no attachment to, which probably isn't the best time. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, do not run this as your first adventure for people who've never engaged with this stuff before. That they will probably not get it, but at the same time, it's balance. There is a lot of details in here that are decently loving send-ups of older concepts, and from that perspective, it does succeed. I think from that design, if that was part of the main assignment there, and there's lots of poachable things from in here as well, but it's not nearly the same as like the Spelljammer thing where you have like some character options and a bunch of new creatures to pick around from, or the Planescape one where I think, as far as campaigns have gone, I think that's been the strongest overall one that we've read. I think partially because we both like Planescape as an environment, but also it has Afterlife Baseball, which automatically makes it. There's no baseball side plot in this entire thing. What were they doing? They should have had more Spire Ball. Come on.
0 out of 10. Not a single baseball hit with a bat.
I would even have bought it a golf reference. Maybe you have to use the rod of 7 parts as a golf club, and hit Vecna's eye back into his socket or something like that. No, that's Asarak. Sorry about that. You're playing mini golf with Rerak's eye gems. There you go.